Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Naruto Got Harem in Jujutsu Kaisen. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. NeonZangetsu. It's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face. I have awaited this moment for so long. So very long. You are cordially invited. An invitation from the Kumo clan? Maki and Mai scrutinized the letter over Naruto's shoulder, eyeing it like the riddle it was. It was the former who adjusted her glasses and found her voice next. Do we have relations with them? Not particularly, but the clans have often set themselves against one another in the past. He looked back to the fine parchment and considered it anew, then reread it aloud for their sake. Naoya, Maki, and Mai are hereby cordially invited for tea at their earliest convenience. I look forward to making your acquaintance. We have much to discuss. How unlike the Kumo clan to reach out to the Zenien in such a manner. But that was undoubtedly their seal etched into the wax. Is this a trap? Could be, he shrugged, but we haven't really done anything to tick them off so. Mai scoffed. Do they even need a reason? The clans are always looking for a chance to one-up each other and knock one another down a peg. It's always been like that since the golden age of jujutsu. The strong and crafty survive. The weak and naive get crushed. The Kumo themselves have always been known for their blood-cursed technique but little else, which is why they often take in anyone with a reputable curse technique. No one really cared until recently, but they've been experiencing an influx of skilled individuals as of late and what? She flushed beneath his and Maki's gaze once she realized they were staring at her. Hey, don't look at me like that. I did a bit of reading, alright? Forewarned is forearmed and all that. Clever girl. Naruto patted her head, drawing a pleased noise from his surly cousin. We have good relations with the Gojo clan, and the Kumo might not like that. He looked to Maki, saw her pout, and tousled her hair as well. I've barely heard anything about this so-called princess of theirs. She has special eyes, Maki pointed out as he withdrew his hands. Like you and so? His own eyes shimmered softly. I know that much. Really, this reeked of a setup. He was tempted to send Naruto ahead in his stead, since the old man was still nominally the clan head for now, but the letter was clear. Why did they want to see him, let alone Maki and Mai? When asked, neither had any answer and the three of them were left to dwell on it for some time. How boring! Sukuna's yawn echoed through his mind, piercing their doldrums. If there's a trap, spring it. Make your enemies cower in their own domain or yours, before you slaughter them. His lips pursed at the thought. No. I'm not you. It's not my way to butcher those who haven't raised a hand against me. Yet you'd happily kill most of your clan. Most of my clan are old fogies and idiots clinging to past glories. Imbeciles actively trying to handicap me or harm those I care about. That's different. They've more than earned my wrath. Dark laughter rippled into his thoughts. Cheeky brat. Wake me when things finally get interesting. The world snapped back and he found Mai tugging his sleeve. What about Megumi and Tsumiki? Blast it all. Had she been saying something while he was distracted? What about them? He feigned a shrug. Toji can watch them. Another thought occurred to him. Shikaka. Matatabi. The little Biju appeared beside their respective masters in a plume of smoke, heeding his commands. They were growing but they were still just so small. Made him want to pet them, you know? They might not take too kindly do that, but he still wanted to nonetheless. Mastering himself, he gave each of tiny beasts a stern look. Don't reveal yourselves to the Kumo clan unless they attack us, alright? That drew the inevitably expected protest from both Maki and Mai as well as them, of course. All but why? As if he needed to explain, but better safe than sorry. Because I'd rather not reveal you to the world unless I absolutely have to. Most might think you're Shikigami until you open your mouths. Talking cursed spirits are supposed to be rare, and I don't want them to try and take you. Am I understood? The quartet, human and Biju alike, bowed their heads and muttered their assent. Good, he waved them on. Go get ready. We leave within the hour. No need to tell them twice, the twins scarpered. He watched them flee with a rueful sigh. It was actually kinda nice when people took his advice, realized he was actually trying to help them, did as he said, and reaped the benefits. He could count the few who listened on the fingers of one hand. Maki and Mai, Saru, then Hanami. Toji might be the fifth, but it had taken him years just to make him listen, let alone force him to be a proper parent. Mei couldn't count for obvious reasons. He'd bribed her back then and was still bribing her now. So long as the cash kept coming, things would go smoothly between them. Now if only things went so well with the Kumo. Right. Just thinking of it threatened to tempt fate. But then again he'd fought fate before, and won, hadn't he? He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Medusa. The air rippled behind him as she appeared before him on bent knee, head bowed, still wearing her human guise. You called? Opening his eyes, he looked her way. She wasn't going to like this. I need you to keep an eye on Megumi and Tsumiki while I'm meeting with the Kumo clan. Her head snapped up as disbelief flashed across her face. My place is with you. I'll be fine. You will not. She burst to her feet, hair rippling ominously. This is a trap. Can you not see? For them to send you an invitation now of all times. It was probably the work of his brothers. Yeah. He'd figure as much. Naom was a bit of a maniac as the eldest, but Natsuo was crafty. He had to be. He was the middle child after all, which made his position in the clan all the more tenuous. He wouldn't put something like this past him. But last he checked, he didn't have the clout to pull of something like this. Was he missing something here? It probably is a trap, he temporized, steepling his fingers. But if we spring it, we can figure out what our enemies are after. When her eyes flashed mutinously, he held up a hand to ward her jujutsu off. The way I see it, if they're after me, I can fight my way free while protecting Maki and Mai. If they want Megumi and Tsumiki, you and Toji will be more than enough to fend them off. Nobody will get hurt. And besides, he held up his hand, flashing the wooden ring Hanami had given him, still worn on his finger to this day. I've got a few aces up my sleeves. And if push comes to shove. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. I do not like it. Ah geez. She looked like he'd slapped her. Medusa. She stomped a foot, cutting him off. I said I do not like it. You should rely on me more. She flung up a hand to her chest, voice breaking. Trust me more. I'm stronger than her. Smarter. Faster. I'm better. I have been by your side all this time from the moment you gave me this power. But where has she been? Nowhere. We haven't heard a word from her since she left. And now you trust her to swoop in and save you if things go south? His face softened. I do. Mejua's pale visage went red with rage. Now ya. And I trust you too, he spoke over her outburst before she could build up steam. Hanami swore a binding vow before Maki and Mai, but you didn't. That's why you're the only one I can trust with this. You adore Megumi and Tsumiki, don't you? I've seen you watching over them like a mama hawk ever since they came to the Zenin clan. Her mouth clicked open. Opened again. On and on it went as she failed to find words. Finally, a small whine escaped her lips. That's not fair. I know it isn't. He rose from behind his desk and circled round it to face her fully, knowing she wouldn't hurt him. You've come a long way. No thanks to you. She looked away from him with a huff. Must you walk into the jaws of the beast like this? He quirked a blonde brow her way and threw her words back at her. Must you phrase it like that? Yes, we must. She crossed both arms before her bosom. Fool of a boy. He patted her arm and tried to reassure her the only way he knew how. Don't worry. I'm the strongest. You are not. Medusa grabbed him by the face with both hands and hissed at him, flashing her fangs furiously. He let her, knowing she needed to vent. There are monsters out there you haven't seen, horrors you cannot comprehend. You and Saru are strong, I do not deny that, but even the strong can be toppled with careful planning. Which is why I have a plan, he reassured her. Did you really think I'd walk into this blind? Is that so? She set her forehead to his. Tell me your plan, then. Happily, he preened. Let me go and I will. She relented and he did just that. By the end of it, her eyes were wide indeed. You're absolutely insane. Maybe he shrugged one shoulder as she balked at him. Promise you'll summon me if need be. I will. But before I go here. He held out his right hand, took hold of his pointer finger and flooded it with cursed energy, mingled with chakra then tore it off. Oh. Still hurts like hell? Pain flared through his knuckle at the sudden separation, but he grit his teeth against it and humbly offered the severed digit to his curse. Take this. Just in case. Her eyes lit up. For me? Yup, he regrew the lost finger with this. You might finally become a proper special grade. She wouldn't be on the lower end of the spectrum anymore. And you're trusting me with this power? This would be her third finger. He wasn't sure if she could take a fourth and frankly, he wasn't willing to risk it. Every cursed spirit had a limit. Some had imploded outright after taking in a single finger. Others went mad. A few even tried to turn on him, drunk as they were on their newfound power. Medusa was the sole success for the time being, until he found a fox spirit. Maybe he should ask Hanami someday. The band on his finger tingled at the thought as he rubbed it absently. Medusa raised his offered finger to her lips and bit down. My thanks for the meal. Crunch. So he's taken the bait, then? Of course he would. Now it begins. The Kumo clan compound appeared harmless from the outside. In terms of appearance, it rather resembled the Zenien clan at a glance, in that it was isolated from the city and built in the traditional Japanese building style. A long, winding stone staircase wound its way up the mountain leading up to a series of large buildings replete with beautiful flowing arches and towering crimson pillars, the very height of beauty. So why did he feel so anxious? Sukuna was of no help at all naturally. Bastard was sound asleep, just like he'd said he would be. Naoya? He looked down and found Mai gripping his right hand, while Maki had seized upon his left. The twins' expression mirrored the anxiety he felt within. He looked up the stone steps to the gate beyond. Someone, was waiting for them up there. He could sense it, a quiet, brooding anticipation, a long-placed yearning about to be realized. Worse, he couldn't tell if that emotion was negative or not, so nebulous was the feeling. Whoever was pulling the strings here, they'd been looking forward to this for a very long time. Was this really a good idea? For a moment he was tempted to sweep them up into his arms, flood the place with shadow clones and bolt. To hell with his plan, but no. He couldn't do that now, could he? Well, he could, but he wouldn't. He'd planned this out painstakingly, down to the very last detail, and given Mei a hefty bonus besides. Backing out now would only put all his hard work to waste and make him look bad. More than that, he'd feel like a coward and he'd never hear the end of it. Rather than retreat, he knelt instead and drew the girls in for a quick hug. No matter what happens, stay behind me, he made a point to look each in the eye. All right? Maki and Mai nodded wordlessly over his shoulder. They trusted him implicitly, believed in him wholeheartedly. He could see it in their eyes as they drew back, even if he wasn't entirely sure he deserved said trust. That settled it. He'd make sure to get them out first if things went south. His safety was secondary. After all, he could heal himself. They could not. Mustering up his courage, he released them, drew himself up, and marched up the mountain without looking back. A spindly fellow with a pale face and long hair met them at the gate, wrapped in somber robes of black. The moment he saw them, he smiled, bowed deeply at the waist. You must be Lord Naoya. I am, what else could he say? Here was no point in antagonizing a poor doorman. We're expected. Yes, of course, the strange man tittered eerily. How very polite of you. His beady eyes narrowed upon Maki and Mai and his pallid visage stretched into a smile. And these are your cousins, I trust? They are. He wasn't giving this one any more than he needed to, not with a creepy smile like that. Younger than I expected. More's the pity, I suppose. His brow furrowed. Why's that? The pale man smiled at him. The young ones seldom last long here. Maki and Mai shrank back behind him. Naruto absolutely twitched. If you'd be so kind as to let us in? Yes, of course. The doorman beamed. Wherever are my manners? You must forgive me, it's been ever so long since we had such esteemed guests. The gate creaked open behind him with a ponderous groan. If you'd be so kind as to follow me? Right now, he wanted to anything but that, yet he had no choice in the matter. The man led them through a maddening maze of twisting corridors that only seemed to lead them deeper into the complex. Occasionally he glimpsed some small signs of life. He even spied a nearby pond filled with koi fish at one point, flanked by a beautiful garden, yet both were devoid of people. But where was everyone? He could Maki and Mai's mounting tension, mingled with confusion. They dared not speak a word. He couldn't even blame them. There were people here, he could sense it, but only a few dozen people, far from the hundreds he'd expected. Surely the Kumo had more people than this? Something's off. Something's off here. Something's not right at all. Abruptly the pale man stopped before a large good and stepped aside, bowing low. My brother and the lady of the Kumo clan await you within. Maki and Mai tensed behind them. The door swept open and in short order the three of them were ushered through. He didn't miss the fact that it all but slammed shut on their backs. Is someone there? A girl with short-cropped dark hair awaited them at the end of the room, sat before them atop a raised dais. Her eyes closed, her small body clad in a white robe. Naruto nearly scoffed outright. Lady? She was just a kid. Like him. But her eyes. They opened as she raised her head and he beheld her gaze. A beautiful prismatic blue, yet something more as though another light were lurking within. Movement shifted behind her as someone stepped out of the dark, emerging from the shadows at her right. They couldn't have been more different. This girl was small. By contrast her guardian was terribly tall. With a capital T. Taller than Toji even. Tall. At a glance he looked lean, but looks could be deceiving as he well knew. Clad in dark trousers with matching shoes and a loose green jacket besides, he radiated an eerie presence. His eyes lay hidden behind a pair of dark shades, darker even than his close-cropped hair, yet there was something strange about his cursed energy. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite a cursed spirit either. Rather, it felt as though all his energy were trapped somewhere between. What was he? And why did it feel like he was actively suppressing the lion's share of his power? He didn't think him weak for a moment. That was his first thought as he beheld the stranger standing guard over the girl. No, if anything, this guy was strong. Dangerously so. Sukuna perked up in his head. Well, this is interesting. You attract all sorts of freaks, don't you? Naruto ruthlessly ignored that remark. Because the girl had moved. Greetings, Naoya Zenien, she smiled up at him, having somehow crossed the room between one blink and the next. It's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face. When had she? Maki and Mai jolted back with a yelp. I have awaited this moment for so long. The nameless girl's hands clasped his gently, little more than a brush of a feather. So very long now. She was the very picture of ethereal grace, and for a fleeting moment he had the strangest sensation that he wasn't talking to a girl at all, but something more. You are exactly as I imagined you would be. Still holding his hands, she bowed her head low in startling deference. My name was, or I suppose you could say still is, Shiki. The very air shivered as she said her name. Shaking himself out of his stupor, his gaze flitted past her, to the, and this is? Oh, him? Shiki straightened and looked back to the massive man with a fond smile. This is Toguro. He protects me. At the mere mention of his name, the giant strode forward at lazy gait. Naruto wasn't fooled for a moment. He didn't see a single missed movement. Nice to meet you, Naoya Zenien. His voice was akin to a slow-moving avalanche rumbling its way down a mountain, yet it gave nothing of his intentions away. I hear you're quite strong for your age. Maki and Mai clammed up. Is there a reason you asked us here? Shiki tilted her head to regard him as one might some shiny trinket. Do I need a reason to make friends? You've been doing that yourself, lately. And besides, she looked to her minder once more. Toguro asked after you so insistently. I thought it would be nice for you to meet. You honor me. Her bodyguard rumbled a sigh. It was a passing interest, nothing more. She granted him a small smile. That's not what I recall. You're worse than Genkai, I swear. Naruto blinked. Gen who? It's none of your concern. Toguro looked them over intently, considering each of them in turn. I see the sorcerer killer isn't with you today. A pity. I would have liked to fight him again. He removed his shades, revealing dark, almost soulless eyes. The hairs on the back of Naruto's neck rose. I would like you to K. The door crashed open, cutting him off. Sorry I'm late, a light, breezy voice sang out. Traffic was murder. I ran into a stray curse on the way and killed it for you too. You're welcome. A lovely blonde blood-spattered woman sauntered, clad in a black sleeveless top with blue jeans, boots thudding against the wooden floor. By contrast, she didn't make any attempt to hide her cursed energy from anyone. It rippled forth from her in waves, strong and purposeful, enough to make even Toguro take notice. He didn't miss the way the man's lazy posture instantly snapped to attention at the sight. He couldn't blame him. If that man was a mountain hiding its peak in misty clouds, then this woman was an utterly unrestrained force of nature, someone who lived by her own rules, and all others be damned. He'd never felt cursed energy quite like this before. This woman's a wild beast. Oh, her eyes lit up at the sight of him. Fancy meeting you here. You're that Zenin boy, right? Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto didn't see a single soul to save him in sight. Maki and Mai shook their heads, wanting no part of this madness. I'm going to say yes, he hazarded reluctantly. Against my better judgment. Great. The baffling buxom blonde brought her hands together with a delighted clap. Then I have just one question for you. What kind of woman is your type? Naruto blinked at his fellow blonde. He blinked hard. Ha! You're nothing like Gojo Saru. The ability to fear your enemies is one of your strengths. It forces you to reach your potential, pushes you beyond your limits. But you haven't been scared enough. You're not ready for what lies ahead. You need some motivation. That's why I've come here. To show you. Power. What we fear. What kind of woman is your type? Naruto blinked. He blinked hard. Ha! Reality reasserted itself with a violent lurch, his thoughts stumbling and tumbling over one another in tangled cords of confusion. Who in blazes was this woman? More importantly, who was she to come barging in here, covered in blood, and ask such a ridiculous question of him? The sheer audacity of it all left him flabbergasted for the first time in months. He almost didn't want to know who she was, and yet he kinda did, ya know? Now if only he could figure out why Maki and Mai looked fit to spit right about now. Was it something he'd said? Yuki Tsukumo. Toguro settled the matter for him with another long-suffering sigh. Must you always ask new acquaintances that? Yes, we must. The baffling buxom blonde brought a winning smile to bear upon the stoic hitman. It's a personality test. One you never did answer, come to think of it. And I still won't, came the black-hearted rebuttal. Stingy. Naruto's brow, meanwhile, had shot straight up to his hairline. Yuki Tsukumo? The eccentric special-grade sorceress? The one who never took on missions anymore? The one who could supposedly flatten a building with a single punch? This was her? He'd never seen her before. She was a recluse, seldom seen in Japan at all. He only knew of her because Satoru had mentioned her once. He stared at her for a moment with his eyes of creation, seeking a better feel for this strange woman. Yet try as he might, he couldn't make heads or tails of her. Yuki didn't look all that powerful at a glance. If it weren't for the cursed energy surging through her like wildfire, he would have thought her an ordinary human with an exceptional stance. What was her cursed technique? What made her so powerful? What made her confident enough to walk into a room full of powerful people and smile the way she did? She wasn't tense, but he could tell she was ready for a fight. Beneath that lazy posture, her body was coiled like a spring, ready to burst into action at the slightest provocation. She was still staring at him expectantly. Did he really have to answer her? It would be annoying if she hounded him, so, what's my type? In an instant he became keenly aware of so many eyes upon him. Yuki and Toguro and Shiki he could understand, but why were Maki and Mai staring? They were just kids. Absurd. Sukuna heaved a sigh somewhere in the back of his mind. You cannot possibly be that naive. Naive about what? Nothing. He could almost hear the sardonic smile in the curse's voice. Don't say I didn't warn you. I'll laugh when this inevitably blows up in your face, brat. Well, he thumbed his chin with his left hand and painstakingly began to count down off the fingers of his right. I guess if I had to pick, it would be somebody strong but cute. A woman with killer curves who could give as good as she gets, is a fantastic cook, and maybe kick my ass? Maki and Mai slumped behind him with a whine. For some strange reason, his answer seemed to absolutely, devastatingly delight Yuki. Nice answer, boy. She flicked him a wink and thumbs up besides. You have high standards. I can see why everyone's so keen on you. Shiki tilted her head. Indeed. He certainly is an exacting individual, isn't he? Toguro rumbled another sigh. Aren't you forgetting something, my lady? Oh my. The baffling girl touched a hand to her cheek and blinked quickly. Wherever are my manners? Please, won't you stay for dinner? You've come all this way to meet us on such short notice. It would be rude to send you away without a meal. We can talk business afterward. Naruto bit his tongue. They'd come all this way to see what the bloody invitation was about, and still no luck. Just what kind of game were they playing it here, and why did it feel like he was missing something? Distantly he hoped Toji was having a terrible time with the kids. If he had to suffer through this, then so did that bastard. What have we learned? Toji Fushiguro planted a fist on his hip, frowning down at his children. Megumi and Tsumiki groaned at his feet, thoroughly exhausted, unable to form words. Well, they'd gotten the gist of it. If not, they'd pick it up sooner or later. Naoya, though running for 10 miles was enough, 20-mile runs it was. Up in him. Dinner was a chaotic affair. Naruto tried to make sense of it all but lost himself after the second course, soon followed by a third and a fourth. It felt like a never-ending train of food constantly wheeled in by attendants, so much so that he barely had a chance to process it all, much less ask what the Kumo were after. Didn't stop him from asking after another helping though. Then another. And yet another. A hot pot. An honest-to-goodness hot pot. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had one of those. Delicious didn't even begin to describe it. Maybe he'd have to see his way to getting the Zenin clan a better chef in the future? Whomever the Kumo had was clearly top tier. Smiling softly to himself, he polished off the last of his meal. Yuki and Toguro must have wandered off at some point between the second course and the third, because he didn't see them anywhere. Shiki, meanwhile, had somehow managed to corner Maki and Mai when he wasn't looking and began peppering them with questions about all sorts of things. Poor girls were utterly out of their depth. Mai cast a pleading lure his way and he found himself half tempted to swoop in and save, only to remember how they'd thrown them to the wolves earlier today and abstained. Instead he sauntered past the unlikely trio and snagged Maki's hair tie as he went, because he was petty, drawing a gasp from his little cousin as her long hair spilled free. He sauntered past, twirling her scrunchie on one finger as he made his grand escape. Warm and full, he took his chance to stumble outside onto the veranda. The night air was crisp and cool against his skin, silently soothing his soul. Here at least he could feel at peace. There were more people in the distance now, more than he'd sensed earlier. Was that a cause for concern? He could tell they were sorcerers, some even seemed to be headed this way. On a whim, he both created and flicked a shadow clone their way at speed. A good distraction for. Someone swept open the door behind him, shattering that unpleasant thought. A familiar voice filled the night. I'd be wary of that guy if I were you. He glanced over his shoulder. Who? Toguro. Yuki flopped down beside him, wearing a rueful grin, clutching a bottle of sake in her offhand. The big guy, you know. The one that seems to be interested in you? The sorceress flailed a hand around for good measure. The Kumo clans had him on retainer for a while now. They liked to send him out against curse users and the real nasty cursed spirits. The man's never failed a single mission. Even fought the sorcerer killer himself to a standstill once. You mean Toji? Oh, she quirked a brow. On a first-name basis with him, are you? He's my uncle. No point in concealing it, not when she'd find out sooner or later. Yuki's face blanked for a moment before lighting up again. You managed to rein that monster in? I might drop by sometime. Please don't, he deadpanned. You're far too much of a handful. Why are you even here, anyway? Yuki beamed. Well, I was just passing through when I received an invitation, same as you. The Kumo clan's princess is quite the wonder. She necked her bottle and guffawed with a pleased sigh before her eyes sought the stars above once more. I think she might be able to make my dream a reality. And how's that? She winked at him. With death, of course. Something in the bland way she said that made him tense. She can kill all sorts of things, even cursed techniques. Did you know that? No, and now he dearly wished he hadn't. Was the lady of the Kumo clan truly that dangerous? If she was, then maybe they should leave. Silence lingered between the two of them for a moment. He didn't like it. He frowned and made to ride. Yuki tugged at his arm. Say, Nayak, can I ask you another question before you go? He yanked his arm free. If you ask me what my type is again, I will bonk you. Wait. A peal of laughter was his reward. I won't ask that. Her hands flailed a moment more when he didn't look convinced. Promise. I'd better not regret this. Outwardly, he forced a thin smile to his lips. All right, shoot. What do you think of cursed spirits? He blinked, baffled. Some are better than others. That's a broad way of saying they're weak. Did they give you much trouble? Some brat, she elbowed him. What would you do if I told you I want to create a world where cursed spirits don't exist? I wouldn't believe you. Excellent, she flashed him a Cheshire grin. I dislike blind faith. You see, there are two ways to create such an utopia. 1. She flicked a finger forward, erase all humanity's cursed energy. The second, up came another finger and he found himself stricken with the inexplicable urge to bite it off, is to make all humans capable of controlling their cursed energy. That sounded like a massive undertaking even for him. He said as much. I agree. That's why I prefer the second method myself. Yuki waggled both fingers his way. After all, compared to non-sorcerers, jujutsu sorcerers like you and I leak very little cursed energy because we have to consider the cursed energy consumption for using techniques and the difference in capacity. Think about it. Her hand curled into a fist and thumped him on the chest. If all humans became sorcerers, then cursed spirits will no longer be produced. They might even cease to exist. His smile soured. A world where Hanami and Medusa didn't exist, where they were just gone. A world where his newly reborn Biju had never been created. A world where all his achievements meant nothing. His lips pursed. I disagree with that goal. And why is that? Once a curse reaches a certain level of sentience, they become intelligent. He propped himself up against the nearby wall and crossed both arms before his chest. I'm not saying it's always a good thing. Curses can be crafty, and most times, they're just as murderous. But don't paint them with broad strokes. I've met at least two who aren't the mindless killing machines you espouse them to be. There could be more out there. Kiddo, I've been doing this a lot longer than you, and I have yet to meet a single nice, cursed spirit. He slammed a hand down on the deck. Then you haven't been looking hard enough. Is that so? Her eyes strayed to the wooden band ring on his hand. You've already met a few, haven't you? These special grades. Something kicked deep in his chest. It felt like anger. You want to know what I think of cursed spirits? He rounded on her, eyes flashing. Here's my answer. Let's take your idea and tweak it. Consider cursed spirits their own species once they reach special grade status. If one eventually gains proper intelligence and reasoning, then shouldn't we teach them the right way to live? She balked. You're mad. That's what they all say before brilliance, he countered. We weren't meant to fly. We weren't meant to breathe underwater. We weren't meant to venture out among the stars. The list goes on and on. And how will you regulate such a system? Did she enjoy poking holes in his theory? Felt like it? I'm working on it, he steepled his fingers in return. If a curse wants to live in peace and has no desire to harm anyone, then it should be allowed to live in peace. Do you even hear yourself? Anger roused itself once more, becoming wrath. In that case, why not just eliminate all non-sorcerers? Yuki froze. That would be the simplest method, wouldn't it? He jabbed a finger into her hip so hard that she actually jolted back a little. Continuously eliminating non-sorcerers, forcing humans to adapt to the environment, survive, and become sorcerers themselves. He was playing the devil's advocate now, he knew, but he didn't care. That would undoubtedly promote evolution, wouldn't it? When you say it like that. Like what? He met her stare evenly. I could do it, you know. Could what? Kill everyone in Japan, he let the words fall between them like an iron curtain, firm and heavy. It wouldn't even be that hard thanks to creation of all things. Do you have any idea of the techniques I've been cooking up in my spare time? I've even got a few ideas from reading light novels and manga. I haven't quite gotten them all to work properly just yet, but don't worry, I will. Her eyes widened. But I'll be honest, he blinked up at her, ignoring her words. I don't have it in me to care for everyone. Not in this world. Not anymore. I'll protect those I hold dear, maybe make a few friends along the way, but why should I care what random people think of me? Half my clan already want me dead, and I wouldn't be surprised if the higher-ups are actively plotting my demise as we speak. They're all like little mongrels, always yapping and nipping at my heels. That doesn't mean you should. So many people want me dead, he talked right over her, running her argument right over. And for what? Trying to do good? Trying to save others? Trying to change the world? Frankly, it's a miracle I haven't gone rogue and started offing people already. Do you want me to? Because if not, you really need to work on giving advice. If you said that shit the wrong person at the wrong time, you drive them off the rails. He finished with a shout, eyes stinging, chest heaving, pulse pounding in his veins. All the while, his hands twitched restlessly at his sides, aching to reach up and give her a good hard shake. Pikes. Yuki leaned back and took another long swig from her bottle. Anyone ever tell you sound like an adult sometimes? A bitter laugh welled up in his throat, only narrowly choked down. More than you could possibly know. Something settled in her amber eyes just then, and he had the strangest feeling he'd passed a test. It certainly won't be boring, this future of yours. Perhaps I'll visit after all seeing ya. Yuki walked past him and made to round the corner. Much to his annoyance, she paused just shy of doing so, polished off the last of her bottle and sighed. He's all yours. Naruto wasn't surprised when Toguro emerged from the shadows, looming large. He'd expected this for a while now. Felt it in his bones. His very soul. I would like a word with you, Naoya Zenien. Yup, he'd seen this coming a mile off. Let's take this somewhere else. This way. He followed Toguro up over the clan wall and into the forest. All the while, Shiki's retainers said not a word to him. He led him relentlessly onward for what felt like an eternity, until finally, they came to an abandoned grove, more of a clearing really, and stopped there. The full moon waned above them through the trees, casting ghostly light across the grass. It made the scene all the more eerie somehow. All right, spill it. He shoved both hands in his sleeves and planted his feet. Why'd you call me out here in the middle of the night? A cold breeze rustled the leaves. Toguro didn't answer him for the longest time. That was a good speech, he finally said at length. But even Soyuri not ready. His brow furrowed. Ready for what? For what lies ahead? But screw this. He was losing his patience. Can we skip the riddles and jump to the part where I kick your ass already? He took his hands from his sleeves, fingers hooking into claws. Or did your little miss tell you to kill me? Toguro rumbled out a hoarse laugh, rusty from years of disuse. It's not nearly so complicated as you make it seem. That girl reminds me of a dear old friend of mine. I'll see her protected. And what of you, Naoya Zenin? Do you have the strength to protect those you care for? I won't allow a weakling to stand in her presence. That's not the whole reason, is it? No, he shook his head, it isn't. I admit, my motivations are a bit more personal than hers. There was just something about this guy, something that seemed downright familiar. Were you really? In a sense, I'm like you. Toguro didn't budge, he had no need to, even as the wind picked up, he just stared at him. I didn't ask to be reborn either, that choice was taken from me. Your presence here has warped this world, which made such a thing possible in the first place. The wind rose around them, warping into a howl that threatened to tear down the very trees themselves. This time, his smile wasn't kind. You're afraid of me, aren't you? Naruto snorted. I prefer the term wary. Good. Shiki's retainer rumbled a laugh. That honesty will serve you well. The ability to fear your enemies is one of your strengths. Without warning, he abruptly shed his jacket, casting the green garment aside with a contemptuous flick of the wrist. It forces you to reach your potential, pushes you beyond your limits. But you haven't been scared enough. You're not ready for what lies ahead, you need some motivation. That's why I've come here to show you true power. The wind died. I'm a very untalented sorcerer, you see. Toguro grit his teeth as his very body began to bristle. I can only increase the size of my muscles, so... It was instantaneous. One moment a slim man stood before him. In the next, with a shout, he gained height and mass that simply hadn't been there before. Cursed energy slapped him in the face as he stood his ground in quiet disbelief. Then that, it kept rising, swelling higher and higher, larger and stronger, and oh geez, he's really getting jacked, I should probably take my weights off. A fist slammed into his face, snapping his head back. He staggered one step, heard another blow coming in hot, and he pivoted and stomped once, dropping his restraints to counter and catch the punch with both hands. Toguro's punch rattled his very bones and nearly broke every bone in his arm. Reversed curse technique put paid to that quickly, sure, but still, it hurt like hell. You think I'm not afraid? He grit his teeth as the earth cratered underfoot. Been there, done that. I've already told someone this before, you musclehead. I'm always afraid. You think you know what fear is? Toguro pushed down on him, driving him to a knee. Don't bore me with speeches, boy. You're afraid this fight will be boring? His head snapped up, the whites of his sclera tainted a furious black, blue eyes gleaming poisonous shade gold as black marks scrawled across his face. Let me spice it up for you then. He dropped an arm, twisted his neck, and let that towering fist rocket by. Then his fist scythed out, slammed into then through Toguro's torso, tearing a gaping hole in his body. Momentum ripped him away and flung him back against a tree, then another, followed by 5 more as the great Goliath hurtled into the forest. You know what'd be boring? Cracking his bloody knuckles, he conjured a lava raisin shuriken just overhead. If you weren't powered up, so do me a favor. And stay exactly the way you are. Laughter answered him. That's much better. I actually felt that. Much to his annoyance, the giant slowly righted himself. As he looked on, the great gaping tear in his torso closed. Reversed curse technique. Of course he had that. Are you kidding me? Today just isn't my day. 1 year from now, a competition will take place, organized by the Kumo clan. I suppose you could call it a tournament of sorts. His lips quirked in a smile at some unspoken joke. Organized by jujutsu sorcerers and neutral curse users, drawing on the most vile cursed spirits you can imagine as bait. The Gojo clan will be invited, of course, as will the Zenien, among others. Each will gather a team of 5 fighters, and those teams battle to the death. They fight for blood and a prize. Your brother will be there, as will I. If you're truly the strongest as you claim, then you should have no trouble dominating the competition. Naruto forced himself to swallow, not from fear, but excitement. And what exactly is this prize? You already know. Toguro didn't deign to explain further. Refuse this invitation and I'll destroy everything you love. His brow flattened. You'll die before you can get them all. He wasn't weak. He could take this guy. Yeah, he wasn't at his peak in this younger body, but still. Perhaps, his adversary smiled, but I'll take at least one of them with me. Can you bring back the dead, Naoya Zenien? A muscle jumped in his jaw. He couldn't. Not yet. In theory he should be able to. He could recreate the Rinnegan at will now in small bursts. But he could barely push or pull things with it, let alone use the more complicated techniques. He didn't even understand the basics of Nagato's yanking out someone's soul, much less resurrection. He didn't think he ever would. Never had he felt more handicapped than he did in this moment. I thought not. Toguro chortled softly. Whoever you were in your past life, you were reborn weaker in this world, just as I. This world wasn't meant for giants like us. But we won't be weak for long now, will we? A gnarled finger rose, pointing his way. When next we face one another, I expect you to be much stronger than this. Wipe him out. Sukuna snarled. Erase him. I know you can. He could with the gates, but as he was now in this younger body, the recoil would be immense and the grave giant had one last parting gift for him. Be seeing you, weakling. Naruto's mind fizzled. Not weak. Not ever again. Did you hear what he just said? His head drooped long, blonde bangs hiding his eyes. It was one insult too many. His world bled red. Hey, muscles. The giant turned, mildly nonplussed. Light filled his vision. Catch. Togoro's every instinct shrilled a warning. He turned quickly, but not quickly enough. Even as raised an arm, he knew he would be too slow. At his current strength, it was nowhere near enough. Clenched knuckles barreled into his palm and sundered it, blowing it clean off at the wrist. His eyes bulged wide. Pain blazed through his veins, short and sharp and oh so savage, so much so that he was still struggling to comprehend it when another punch cratered his skull and smashed him face first into the dirt. Wait, where had the boy gone? A foot barreled into the base of his neck and slammed his skull down. He felt a hand closed around his skull and smash his visage into the grass. Twice. Thrice. Again. Over and over again. Listen here, the firm fingers gripped him by the hair and yanked him up. Only then did he hear the Zenien boy's voice through his ringing ears. I'll play your game, because it sounds interesting. Fun even. I'd like a chance to stretch my legs. But if you ever, and I mean ever, threaten my loved ones again, the grip on his skull became crushing. What you're experiencing right now will feel like a love tap. You got me? Toguro didn't have a chance to reply before the pressure on the back of his skull eased. Reluctantly, he dared to rise. Now Zenien was nowhere to be seen. He glanced down at his mangled, broken stump and frowned. Strange. The wound was bleeding but slow to heal. He suspected it wouldn't for some time, not with that much cursed energy flowing through it. He'd underestimated him. How refreshing. When was the last time someone so young got the drop on him? Not since Shiki herself. The barest beginnings of a smile touched Toguro's face. It had been a long while since he felt pain. The boy had spirit, if nothing else. Just like that one. Toguro removed his glasses. Grow strong, now ya. Strong enough to destroy me. No rebirth, no reincarnation, just pure eradication. He turned his eyes to the distant starry sky above and granted them a rueful smile. Now ya Zenien? The boy was proving to be everything he hoped for and more. I wonder what would you think of him, Urameshi? Achoo! Miles away, a young man sneezed in Shibuya. A bolt of blue light rocketed upward and soared away into the night sky. Ah, come on, he regarded it with a sigh. Who's talking about me now? Bastard made me miss. He looked back to the twitching special grade at his feet with a rueful sigh. You cursed spirits are seriously squishy. Didn't think you'd go down with a couple punches. A black boot nudged the spirit in question, drawing a snarl from it. You were talking a good game before when you tried to gobble up that kid too. Not so tough now, are ya? Were they weak? Or had he just gotten stronger this time around? Reincarnation was such a pain in the ass. Complicated thoughts like this always gave him a nasty headache. Best not to dwell on it. Wretched sorcerer, the curse rasped out, stretching a pale hand his way to feebly grab at his ankle. Kill you. Right? He grinned. Whatever you say. It garbled something that might have been a swear. Hard to tell with all those missing teeth. Almost made him feel sorry for it. It's nothing personal, pal. I just can't stand the sight of your ugly mug. With an exaggerated swagger he mimed a handgun with 2 fingers and pointed downward at the cursed spirit. So let's try this again, shall we? A bolt of blue barreled down. Spirit gun. There are 3 things all wise men fear. 3 things that must be avoided at all costs. The sea in storm, a night with no moon, and the anger of a gentle man. But you're not angry, are you? No, surely not. You don't get angry. At the end of the day, you're better than that. Better than them. You see, you're a calm and reasonable person. Just like me. Aren't you? Calm and reasonable. So, Suguru palmed his face and heaved a sigh. So what? Satoru tilted his head, regarding the swathe of destruction taking place below their precarious perch. Think we should do something? Should they? That was the question, wasn't it? Another tremor shook the earth. Should they intervene? One might argue that they should, but even so Geto winced despite himself as an acre of forest abruptly evaporated before his very eyes. Hot wind lashed at the air, and the bough they were standing atop, the entire tree, swayed violently as another savage shockwave rattled the forest. Even from way up here he could feel that twisted, cursed energy, hear the sounds of destruction and the maniacal laughter that followed, the telltale noise of trampled trees and one man being beaten within an inch of his life. Someone had made NeonZangetsu angry. And now? Now there would be hell to pay. Satoru had dragged him out here to the Kumo clan on a whim, wanting to check in on their young Kohai. It was their scared duty as his senpai, he insisted, or something along those lines. Suguru was no fool. He knew Satoru just wanted to check in on the boy. After all, Naoya had potential, even he recognized that. Son Goku yawned on his shoulder, momentarily claiming his attention. Such a curious creature. Its presence really was quite soothing. He patted the tiny beast in an attempt to calm it, only to find that there was no need. Indeed, the little four-tailed monkey was already sound asleep, wholly at its ease. Surely it would be distressed if its creator was actually in danger down there? I mean, he seems like a calm and reasonable person right now. Suguru shrugged one shoulder. It's your call. When he looked back, Gojo was gone. A rueful smile tugged at his mouth. Well, there's my answer. He whipped out his cell phone. Better call Shoko. Shiki considered herself a calm and reasonable person. After all, she died once before. It had not been quick. In fact, it was quite painful. One tended to lose their fear when they experienced the greatest suffering life had to offer. She wasn't the real Shiki you see, but rather a remnant of her, one who had silently dwelt within the original for some time. She went by many names. The Root, the Smiling Swordswoman, the Void. And yet for all her name and power and titles, she hadn't been able to save the real Shiki that day. It should have been her that died against that awful adversary. Yet here she was. She alone remained, enjoying this body and her strange second childhood to the fullest. Because she'd come to relish it, you know? Living. Small things like moonlit walks or cold ice cream and the books. So many books. She'd found a particularly entertaining one yesterday. She'd be sure to read it before bed. Just thinking of her latest acquisition brought a smile to the girl's lips as she sipped her tea. From the moment she was reborn into this world, she'd known she was different. Her eyes were but a part of it. Like her precursor, she saw the lines of death upon every living being. And sometimes not just them but other things as well. Her first demise had taken her ability and cranked it up to 11. A flick of her knife, a twist of her blade following those awful lines, and she could sever it. There was nothing she could not cut. She was a killer through and through, though she did not wish to be. You see, Shiki did not enjoy fighting. Not like Toguro. Killing was a necessary task for her. One she was adroit and adept at, true, but an act she didn't enjoy nevertheless. Toguro had already asked her to kill him once, you know? She remembered that day well. It was shortly after she'd bested him. She'd refused at the time and took him under her wing instead, wanting to give that poor reborn soul a reason to live, but a distant shockwave rattled the clan compound, spilling Shiki's tea. It spattered like blood upon her pristine white robes. The faintest of frowns marred her delicate face as she considered the dark stain. Oh bother. Whatever would she do with that sorry soul? It seemed he'd simply sought someone stronger. Boys would be boys, even in another life. She couldn't even bring herself to blame her fellow reincarnator for his headlong rush into death. Toguro believed he deserved to die, even now. Shiki could sympathize. For you see, she too had once been such a lost soul, bereft and searching for purpose. There had been a brief period, very brief, shortly after her rebirth, when she'd wanted nothing more than death, to die and return to the cycle of life. Yes, for a time she had despaired. Until then she'd learned of him. A boy who was her opposite in every way. An ancient technique that was the very antithesis of her own. NeonZangetsu and his wondrous creation of all things. She had to see him, had to meet him. Easier said than done, of course. The elders of her clan were foolish old men and women stuck in their antiquated ways like so many others. It didn't take her long to realize that the rest of the Kumo clan would never change under the elders' rule. Talking was pointless. So she took the clan from them. Pried it from their cold, dead hands. It wasn't hard. Those who didn't fall to Togoro's fists were soon silenced by her blade. Shiki took no pleasure in such wanton slaughter. Such was necessary. She killed enough to make the rest pliable to her demands. Little Narutoshi was nice, though. She let him live. But by the time she'd finally finished her little purge, refilled the ranks of the clan with capable sorcerers loyal to her, and commenced her plans, quite some time had passed. And once she finally sent that fateful invitation, once NeonZangetsu finally presented himself before her. It had only been a few short hours ago, but thinking of it still stole her breath away. The moment she'd laid eye on him, Shiki had been doubly surprised. When his eyes met hers, she'd found herself intrigued. First and foremost, she'd instantly realized Naoya was reincarnated, just like her. His soul had the distinct shape of it, that of a being too large for his body, of a flood squeezed through a faucet. She looked at him and knew his true name as she knew all others. Her eyes saw many things, not only his power, but what he was, and what he might become. There was a shadow of something connected to him, both of him and not of him. Curious, but nothing to concern herself with at present. Secondly, she hadn't seen a single line on him. She could see the bonds he had forged through the years, the unseen tethers of his curse technique stretching out from his body to all the things he'd ever created and so much more, but she couldn't sever a single one. He was a nexus, a shatterpoint if you will. If he died, so many things would break. And yet Shiki knew she couldn't slay him. How very refreshing it was to see someone she couldn't kill with a single swing of her sword. And so she decided, if she was meant to be death in this lifetime, then he was life. Reincarnated just like her. He was her counterpart. She had to have him. She must have him. She'd never wanted something so badly in all her lives. Was this love? Shiki wasn't sure. She'd never felt the like before. Even now she found herself stricken by the strange urge to find him, tie him up, and lock him in a room, just so she could have him all to herself. But no, she mustn't do that. He had those little cousins to look after. They were sound asleep in an adjoining room and would object most noisily if she tried to claim him for herself. Besides, he had a host of other bonds. It would not be right for her to monopolize him no matter how much a small part of her might want to. Still, he had been gone with Toguro for some time now. Shiki sighed and began preparing another batch of tea. She was not such a prude as to deny herself some entertainment. The roof shattered overhead in a shower of splinters. It was her one and only warning. Manic laughter followed as the shadows boiled with life. Shiki whirled, a knife flying from the sleeve of her kimono and into her hand. Her foe was upon her in a whirl of steel, striking soundlessly. Too dark to see. Who was it? She parried the first strike, ducked under the second, slapped aside the third, then lunged forward to strike, only for an unseen force to rip her clean off her feet and into someone's grasp. Firm fingers latched onto her throat, spun her right round and slammed her into the nearest wall. Shiki saw stars. No more than that, she felt pain. How long had it been since she'd felt such? Her knife flashed out, seeking his throat, only to lodge itself harmlessly against his collarbone as her aggressor twisted aside at the last moment. An irritated crimson gaze blazed down into her blue through the shadows. Even the very whites of his eyes were bloodshot with quiet fury. "You've got guts, pulling a stunt like this," a darkly indulgent voice purred as blood dribbled onto the floor at their feet and she felt a hand push against her stomach, pressing against her intestines. "Would you like to see them?" Moonlight spilled through the splintered ceiling, revealing the face of her attacker. Naoya? But why was he here? Unless? She squinted and for a singular, awful moment, she could have sworn she saw something etched into that whiskered visage, ghastly lines, like some eldritch tattoos. His eyes were narrow, his lips peeled in a smile outright bordering on a sneer, his curse energy stifling. Furious. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't his energy. That didn't make sense. Oh, very dear. Oh, very, very dear indeed. Just what had he done to himself? No, she already knew. He'd inadvertently linked himself with something horrible. "I am not your enemy," the words sounded hoarse, even to her ears. I never will be. She reached out and laid a trembling hand over his. No matter what. If my life is what you desire, if that will sate your rage, then I will gladly offer it. But here and now, with the hand gripping her throat and a hand ready to disembowel her, Shiki felt a rare flicker of not fear, but anxiety. She did not wish to die again, you see. Dying was unpleasant. Painful. Shiki had already perished before. She and her eyes were all that remained of that stoic, surly girl. If she perished here, would even those fragments remain? Her thoughts began to crumble as her vision darkened. I do not wish to die again, not in a place like this. His fingers bit into her throat. I don't want to die here. The world went gray. I can't die. Naruto. The sound of his name, his real name, seemed to reactivate Naoya. He heaved a short, exasperated breath and the all-encompassing pressure of his cursed energy vanished. His callous sneer eased into an annoyed frown, taking the marks with it. If she hadn't seen them for herself, if she hadn't heard that voice just now, Shiki would have wondered. Had her mind been playing tricks on her? Had she seen things just now? But no, his ironclad grip on her throat was very real. It slackened only after a moment, much to her relief. She dropped to her knees, gasping for air. His shadow loomed larger over her, threatening to swallow her whole. How do you know my name? I know many things, she rasped back. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me. He didn't look like he believed her. A pity. Did you know about this, then? Know what? Shiki looked up and coughed once, still massaging her trachea. I'm afraid I don't understand the question. Toguro, the word damned her old friend. He picked a fight with me and invited me to your little tournament. If that was your idea, you've got a twisted sense of humor. Had he done that? Bless. She'd hoped to keep that a secret for another 3 months at least. No matter. The cat, as they say, was out of the bag. Yes, she had intended to ask Naoya to attend, but as a spectator, not a contestant. Honestly, that Toguro. She'd have to punish him for this. I only knew that he wanted to meet you. Did he offend you somehow? You could say that. Naoya crouched down before her, eyes shimmering a faint shade of gold. Was this little contest your idea or his? Me. She climbed shakily to her feet, adjusted her robes, and pouted when she saw how dirty they were. I dislike the idea of fighting. I'm quite fragile, I'll have you know. I only expressed a desire to meet you. Meet him and possibly make him hers. Why? He grabbed her by the arm and hauled her upright. I've never met you before. Why go to all this trouble? Because you complete me. His eyes widened. Well. An unfamiliar voice crooned. An unexpected love confession. You don't hear those every day. Shiki jolted and jolted hard. She knew who would be there even before she pivoted. Only one entity could just appear like this. You wouldn't happen to be bothering my adorable little Kohai now, would you? The newcomer planted their feet, tucked Maki and Mai's unconscious bodies, when had he retrieved them? Under one arm and tugged down their glasses, revealing prismatic blue eyes. Because that would make me angry and you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Satoru Gojo. His presence was not unexpected here. Still, his timing was most inconvenient. If he'd just waited. It was no use. Shikawa already see the standoff forming between them. 3 titans from the 3 great clans stood their ground, each capable of creating untold chaos. How nostalgic. Why, this rather reminded of her something from her past when she'd confronted other powerful individuals. Such as Gojo. Naoya Naruto rounded on Satoru and broke the impasse before she could recall. You have awful timing, you know that? Where were you earlier? Watching, the older boy grinned. You looked like you had the situation well in hand, but we've got a bunch of sorcerers incoming, so I figured it was time to leave. So the reinforcements were coming after all. Unfortunate. They must have sensed her fluctuating cursed energy. It seemed the time for talk was over. Shiki tried to salvage the situation the only way she knew how. Politely. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Lord Gojo. Is it now? His smile was so very sharp. Because I'm not feeling very pleased. In a single seamless movement he pivoted and planted his hand on Naruto's shoulder, yanking him backward. Time to go, Naoya. I'll give you and the brats a ride back to the Zenian clan, free of charge. The blonde blanched. You mean teleportation, don't you? Gojo grinned. Is there any other way to travel? Damn 6 eyes. Don't send us ahead. The air flickered as they both vanished. Shiki dared to release a breath, right until Satoru Gojo reappeared right before her alone and thrust a finger in her face. Shiki tried to speak, only for her throat to close up. Anything she might have said withered and died on her tongue. Naoya's pressure had been intense before, but this was terrifying. It felt like the sky itself was pressing down on her shoulders, trying to crush the very life from her lungs. She couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. So this was it, then. The moment of her death. How terribly sad. She hadn't even kissed a boy. Shiki closed her eyes, sucked in a sharp breath, and prepared for oblivion. A moment passed. Then another. Another. Why wasn't she dead yet? She dared to creak an eye open. A blur of motion dominated her vision. Gojo chop. True to form, Satoru brought his hand crashing down atop her head in a devastating strike. It didn't hurt so much as it did sting, and a small girlish part of herself Shiki didn't even know she possessed cried out. So too did an unladylike yelp escape her lips as she jerked back, clutching her skull. What was that for? For getting too big for your britches, he sang merrily. I'll deal with you later, missy. Thus declaring, he vanished with a grin, laughter ringing in his wake. Shiki slumped to her knees, heart hammering in her chest. Well, that was bracing. Let's never do that again. She sat there and waited for quite some time, willing her frantic heart to calm. Eventually, the door swung open and another shadow fell over her. Did you have a nice chat, Toguro? Her battered bodyguard sighed. I'm assuming they've already left. Shiki fought down a rare twitch of anger. Was that all he had to say? Indeed they have. They came by to talk with me, you know, here at last. She glared at him. Naoya and Satoru were quite cross thanks to your antics tonight. I got the fright of my life. My apologies. She lobbed a book at him. It bounced off his skull. He accepted her rebuke in silence, undaunted as ever. Do you think they've realized what the prize is? I believe Naruto suspects. She relented with one last small scowl at the man who had caused her so much trouble tonight. As for Gojo Kensei, I still don't think either of them are worthy of you. Or anyone for that matter. Silly man. Even now he placed her upon a pedestal few could reach. She wasn't worthy of such. That will be my choice to make and mine alone. She drew herself up with a languid sigh and considered the ruined roof. That would require repairs, yet for now she girlishly delighted in the moonlight. I appreciate your input, but my choice remains unchanged. It should be entertaining. Don't you see? She smiled softly just for him. It's in our cursed techniques, the very concepts of our beings. Just as he is life, I am death. There cannot be one without the other. She turned a smile back to the moon and all its myriad mysteries. Yes, she decided. This was the right choice. We are meant to be. You just love attracting trouble, don't you? I really don't. Ow. Naruto barked a laugh as Shoko dabbed his shoulder with a bit of antiseptic. Is this really necessary? I can heal myself. Clearly not properly. She wrestled him back down with a huff when he tried to rise from the chair. Just look at yourself. You're skilled at healing, but you don't bother to clean your wounds, let alone correctly. Another attempt to protest on his part resulted in a rare scowl from her. You're rough with your reversed curse technique, and sooner or later, your body's going to pay the price for it. Pride reared its head in his heart. He'd been plenty careful thus far. I know what I'm doing. Hey, it's your funeral. If you want to kill yourself faster, be my guest. The door slammed open as someone kicked it down. Gojo poked his head in. He gonna live? Nope. Shoko sang back. Terminal case of stupidity. Naruto rolled his eyes. If you're quite done, can I have my arm back? She released him with a sigh, and just as well she did, because Satoru flopped down onto the bed beside him. So, a tournament? Of course he'd cut to the quick. I knew the Kumo were up to something. You gonna fight? Naruto tried to hide his curiosity. Doesn't seem like you'd enjoy it. He really didn't want to fight Gojo. It'd be such a pain. Maybe. Satoru shrugged one shoulder and offered him his self-same smile. We've got a mission coming up in about a month, so who knows how long that'll take. Gotta escort some girl to Master Tenjin, and Yaga wants us on guard duty early because a certain someone stirred up trouble with the Kamo. Naruto took the rebuke for what it was. That old fossil? His right ear twitched. Wait, what girl? Gojo rounded on him in an instant. Oh, interested, are we? Not in the least, he scowled right back. I've got enough on my plate. The last thing I need is babysitting another brat. His so-called senpai pulled a face. So you won't join us? Suguru palmed his face. Satoru. I just said no. The honored one crossed both arms before his chest and pouted. Then I won't tell you anything. Annoying little. How bad could it be? Look, will you tell me your plans for the tournament if I help out? In an instant his friend pulled a 180 on him. Sure thing. I'd be happy to enter. A bead of sweat ran down Naruto's brow. No, that wasn't what I meant. I'd actually prefer if you didn't. Too bad. It's not like I'll be fighting to kill anyway. Who knows? He rubbed his hands together with a fiendish giggle. Might be a good chance to scope out some talent for Jujutsu High. As far as teams go, it'd probably me and Suguru. Hey, don't volunteer me. Nanami, and maybe Mei if I pay her enough, he finished, tapping one finger to his chin. That ought to do it. You need 5. Naruto couldn't resist the urge to poke a hole in his plan. You're one short. Bah. That's easy. We can just have. Oh no. Shoko held up a hand to ward him off. No. I'm not a healer, not a fighter. Leave me out of this. Boo. Spoil sport. Don't you worry about that. We'll find someone or drag someone in against their will. Or maybe you can be on our team. Naruto blanched. That's what worries me. The organizers probably wouldn't let that happen. Any team with him and Satoru on it was sure to be broken. Unless? Shoko nudged his side, distracting him. So how you gonna break it to the kiddos? He looked aside with a grimace. Eventually, her elbow found his ribs. Naoya. Suguru grabbed her wrist. Don't be so hard on him. She wrenched her arm from his grasp. You're the one being soft on him. Gojo feigned dismay, stoking the fires of chaos. Mommy and Daddy are fighting again. In your dreams. He drew him aside as the duo began to squabble. So, he whispered, when were you gonna tell me about your Sukuna problem? Naruto's face pinched, recalling his earlier lapse. There is no problem. I haven't eaten any of his fingers. I just get a little angry sometimes is all. Yet you're keeping one on you. It wasn't so much a question as a statement. He sullenly scuffed the floor with a foot. I am for safekeeping. You sure you know what you're doing there, Naoya? Not really, but who else could guard it? Yup. Great, his smile said he'd passed another test. Time to face the kiddos, then. Almost on cue, the bedroom door came flying open and 4 familiar faces tumbled through. And that's our cue. Satoru planted a hand on Shoko and Suguru's shoulders. Exit stage left. See you later, my dear Kohai. Bastard. Naruto spared them a bleak look as Gojo teleported them away, then turned back to the 4 prone youngsters at his feet. He already knew what they were going to say before they said it. He would have done the same in their shoes after all. They were alike in that regard. Which made this all the more painful to say. Before any of you even start, the answer is no. Maki and Mai immediately sprang upright and kicked up a fuss. But why not? Don't even think about it, you two. He flicked a glance over their heads. And that goes double for you, Itsumiki. Megumi tried to raise his right hand. Naruto scowled him into submission. Not a word. The boy flinched and he fought down a wince of his own. He hadn't meant to scare him. Sumiki still rallied. Bless her simple soul. But I've been practicing now, and my technique is as powerful as it is versatile, he agreed with a nod. But can you really bring yourself to kill someone? She made a pained noise, all the blood draining from her face. Well, there are ring-outs, aren't there? And I can make someone give up. Yeah. Maki seized on the opening. We've all gotten stronger. Mai jumped right in next. And we're older now. No. Merely thinking about it gave him a headache. Just no. Besides, each team needs 5 people. None of you are ready for something like this? Megumi didn't argue, bless him. Alas, the girls weren't so easily cowed. Least of all, you're only a few years older than us. But cute. They were tough. And yet I'm stronger than all of you put together. I huffed. No fair. Your idea of power and mine are 2 very different things. For instance, he held up a finger. I'm not sure if Satoru-senpai him at all, he'd accidentally said it again, is actually entering this thing for real, but if he does, he'll probably drag Suguru and Nanami along for the ride, to say nothing of Mei. You want to fight them? Because it won't end well, even if they go easy on you. I winced. But then who's going with you? Even you can't fight alone. Hold that thought. He pressed 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled, cutting her off. Medusa manifested behind him in a shimmer of golden light, and planted a hand on her hip, lending weight to his words. You were saying? Maki sputtered. No fair. She's a special grade spirit. She really was now, wasn't she? That last finger had pushed her over the edge. Her eyes practically bristled with power, ready to render here enemies stone. And he felt a small, petty sense of embarrassment when Medusa leaned against him, all but draping herself over his back. Toguro didn't say anything about special grades being barred from the competition. Besides, to the naked eye, I simply appear human. I faltered, then rallied. That still only makes 2. You mean 3, a muffled voice echoed behind the door. Naruto perked up, inordinately pleased, perfect timing. The door swept open. Tsumaki and Megumi blanched. Toji strode in, wearing a shit-eating grin. A place where I can kill whomever I want? Where do I sign up? Well, this saved him the trouble of tracking him down. Right here. Then we only need 2 more. Now, no. Tsumaki realized what he intended and balked, good girl that she was, then immediately rounded on her father. Daddy, double no. Daddy's. Toji's grin was near feral. Time to show you what your old man can do. Maki and I sputtered explosively. How long have you been listening in? Long enough, and besides, there's someone here to see you. Said he's interested in this tournament shindig. Seriously? But, of all times. I'm flattered, but it's a bad idea to take on a stranger. Naruto sighed, turned his head aside, and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. Whoever he is, tell him now's not a good time. He can back later. Now, someone stepped out the shadows, pale eyes crinkled with quiet amusement. Is that any way to treat an old friend? Wait a minute. He knew that voice. He'd never forgotten it, not once. His head snapped up, eyes bulging in disbelief. Niji. He was just as he remembered. Bloody. But, hello, old friend. Naruto tried to speak, tried to string words together, tried to do something. Needless to say, he failed spectacularly. It was just too much. His body couldn't handle the sudden shock. He passed out in a dead faint. When next he opened his eyes, someone was waiting for him. At a glance he didn't quite realize where he was, only that it wasn't well here. They loomed large over him, a being clad in pale robes, sat atop a throne of broken bones. He took in his guest at a glance, salmon pink hair, piercing red eyes, black tattoos wreathing his smug, smirking face. Even then Naruto didn't quite make the connection, not at first. He sat up warily, rubbing his aching skull and tried to look about, only to find a yawning pit of darkness stretching out on either side of them. Baffled, he looked back to the stranger. Why did he look so familiar? In the end, it was the voice that finally broke through. You're finally awake. The man tilted his head and laid a knuckle against his chin, appraising him as one might a fine gem. Took you long enough. Despite those harsh words, his eerie red eyes glittered with malevolent glee. Don't you know it's rude to keep me waiting? And here I was considering lending you a portion of my power. Realization dawned. Ah, crap baskets. Naruto sprang to his feet. Why the hell are you here? Why wouldn't I be? Sukuna smiled at him in return. It was not a nice smile. I've come to bargain, brat. Humans, curses, demons, they're all the same thing in the end, really. Everybody wants something in this life. There are no exceptions. The key, my dear, is figuring out what that something is. And once you've attained that knowledge, then the advantage becomes yours. That is why Naoya will die. My brother is soft. He may be, but I'm not. What the who the devil are you? Such a poor choice of words. A future scene. Time to bargain. I've come to bargain, brat. It would have been so very easy to take Sukuna's words at face value, simply believe that the King of Curses was genuinely offering help with this so-called equivalent exchange. His bargain sounded simple enough on the surface. Generous, even. A barter. A trade, if you will. An offer between two friends. But they weren't friends now, were they? Not yet. Perhaps not ever, depending on how this encounter went. Don't make such a face, the King of Curses sneered down at him from his throne. It displeases me. All right, breathe. This was his mind, he had the power here. Sukuna couldn't hurt him. Right? Steeling himself, Naruto drew his body up and glowered up at his unwanted guest warily. How are you here? I didn't eat any of your fingers. You shouldn't have incarnated in me. Smart boy. Sukuna clapped his hands. You're right. I haven't incarnated in you. Relief coursed through him hot and heady. Until the king dashed it. But we're still connected. He brought his hands down, steepling his fingers before his chin with a limpid smile. You of all people should know that. A muscle jumped in his jaw. And yet you dragged me here the second I passed out. Why, I already told you. That eerie grin grew another inch. I've come to bargain. Bargain? Naruto absolutely twitched. Surely he was trolling him again. What was his game? Relax, the king chuckled. I can only appear to you like this when you're unconscious. Can't take over any more than you can me. Doesn't explain what happened last night. He remembered it all too well, the manic laughter spilling forth from his lips as he trounced Toguro, the searing rage when he drove his fingers into Shiki's stomach and choked her out. He wanted to say it was Sukuna's fault, that he'd influenced him, and maybe he had. But it hadn't. He hadn't gone berserk, he'd been in perfect control of himself, just angry at the Kumo clan. Furious, really. They thought him weak, vulnerable, that they could manipulate him. So, he had proven them wrong. And it had felt good, you know? He'd enjoyed the shock on Toguro's face, reveled in the horror within Shiki's eyes, the realization that she'd D about and found out. He'd been fully prepared to snap her pretty little neck for drawing him into her machinations and parade her corpse before Toguro. But that wasn't him. He shouldn't enjoy stuff like that. He couldn't. A bone bounced off his head, shattering his reverie and drawing an annoyed noise from him. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, fool. There's a simple explanation for this. Naruto flung up his arms with an aggravated shout. How? Honestly, how can you be so strong yet know so little? Lowering his arm, Sukuna curled the fingers of his right hand into a fist and laid it against his jaw. It's called resonance. My soul is influencing yours. His smirking lips pinched into a sour expression at that. Honestly, it's annoying. It would have been more convenient for me if you actually ate my damn finger instead of this. Dread coursed through his veins like so much black tar. Not a chance. Are you sure about that? His grin returned with a vengeance. Letting me incarnate within you would solve your little problem. Maybe, but it would create an entirely new and far more dangerous one. If he ate one of those, he risked unleashing Sukuna upon the world. Our souls are already linked, Sukuna said. The moment we made contact, your lives, both of them, were drilled into my head. I imagine it's much the same for you, or haven't you noticed when you lose your temper? Yes. He remembered. Blood. Screaming. And above it all, that insane cackle. A thought occurred to him just then. He was taking a gamble here. If he was wrong, Sukuna would likely laugh in his face, or worse, actively try to kill him. Would mental damage equate to harm in the physical realm? He wasn't sure, and in all honesty, he really didn't want to find out. Nevertheless, he mustered his chakra and cursed energy reserves and discreetly peered at Sukuna's soul. Oi, your majesty! The king made a non-committal noise. Naruto lifted his chin. You said you're influencing me. But the reverse is also true, isn't it? You're awfully chatty today. I don't think you've ever held such a long conversation with me. Sukuna fell silent. Victory. Now it was his turn to grin. Resonance is a two-way street. He thrust a finger up at his counterpart, unable to contain a triumphant bark of laughter. If your soul is affecting me, then mine must bleeding over into yours. I'm right, aren't I? His right foot inched forward, followed by his left, then his right once more. You're acting like this a problem for me, but I can tell. It's affecting you as well. Your cursed energy is all over the place. A faint twitch tightened the king's smile, and he couldn't resist one last jab. You've seen my memories, haven't you? Probably lived through them too. Tell me, how does it feel to be human? It must be driving you crazy. Sukuna's raised his hands. It was Naruto's one and only warning. Domain expansion, malevolent shrine. He swore and conjured an azure barrier around himself. Well that he did too, because the first wave fizzled harmlessly against his shield and sparked away into the dark. Yet still they kept coming. An endless torrent of attacks struck from every conceivable angle, wanting nothing more than to cleave him apart and dismantle his body. Naruto grit his teeth, planted his feet, crossed both arms before his chest and held his ground. No weakness. Not here. If he showed even the slightest hint of strain here, Sukuna wouldn't stop. Not until he was dead. After what felt like an eternity, the domain dissipated. Inwardly, he released a quick breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Bluff successful. Sukuna wasn't at full power. He hadn't consumed any of his fingers. Not a single one. Had the King of Curses been at full power, an attack would have shattered his defenses and made him whip out his own domain. As things stood, he'd barely needed to exert himself this time around. What a relief. He never wanted to gamble like that ever again. Never telling Mac and Mai about this. Not ever. And definitely not Sumiki. Too damn smart for your own good. The King of Curses dropped his palms and glared bloody red daggers at him. You're a thoroughly annoying brat, you know that? He couldn't conceal a cheeky grin. Yup. Of course, Sukuna wouldn't be Sukuna if he left it at that. I wonder what will break first? Your heart or my pride? That was the question, wasn't it? Here he was, gambling his life again. Life really sucked sometimes, you know? Buddy, I've befriended demons way scarier than you. So you claim, Sukuna rumbled a laugh, further proof that he'd seen his memories, but you won't find me such easy prey. You've fought and befriended monsters, that I'll acknowledge, but worse than me, the very shadows themselves seemed to lengthen around his face, lending his already twisted countenance a fearsome expression. Do you have the faintest clue who you're talking to? I've got a pretty good notion. A monster. Chaos incarnate. Someone he might not be able to redeem. But he had to try. He'd never forgive himself if he didn't at least make an attempt. You're thinking of using me, aren't you? Sukuna's grin would have made a Cambion cry. Despite all you've said, you want my power. Not for yourself, but for the sake of good. How supremely noble. How many of your clan have you killed with your own gifts? Naruto winced, despite his best efforts. More than I care to admit. The King of Curses rose from his throne with a languid sigh. And what did you feel when you killed them? Naruto shrugged. Shame? Errors were made. In an instant Sukuna stood before him, towering over him in all his dark glory. He struck like a serpent. Naruto let him. He didn't resist all, not in the least, although he could have as a hand closed around his throat, yanked him off his feet, and slammed his back into the watery floor. Sukuna snarled down at him, toothy visage inches from his own. Lie to me again and I'll rip your throat out. What did you feel? Naruto seized his throat in return and squeezed viciously. The King of Curses grunted in surprise, but didn't relent. Nothing, he ground the words up at him. I didn't feel a damn thing. Then why kill at all if not for the pleasure of it? He had the distinct feeling he was being tested. Because it had to be done. Men don't fear swords. He pushed more chakra to his lungs, resisting him as his free hand painstakingly pried the fingers from his throat. They fear monsters. They run from them. They dread them. They don't even think of fighting back against them. A world like this doesn't need a hero. It's had one, and nothing changed. What it needs is a monster. And you believe you know what it is to be a monster? Sukuna scoffed and continued to try and crush him even as he himself was crushed in turn. You have no idea. Shall I show you? Fine by me. He grit his teeth. We could have it out right now. Winner take all. What do you say? Sparks flew between them as they girded themselves for battle. Much his surprise, Sukuna demurred. Tempting but no. Naruto beamed. Glad you saw it my way. Chum? Sukuna looked down, momentarily nonplussed to find an ethereal blue chakra palm inches from his stomach, Rasengan in hand. Clever brat. Offering one hand and arming the other. I like that. He went limp with a laugh, releasing him entirely, forcing Naruto to do the same out of common courtesy. I didn't bring you here to fight, no matter how annoying you might be. Quick as a flash, the King of Curses stood, stepped back, and marched to the base of his throne, yet made no attempt to ascend it. I meant what I said earlier about offering you some of my power. We can even make the terms of said power a binding vow. Naruto felt his hackles rise. That sounds dangerous. It is. So be very careful with the specifics. The king's grin gained an edge. You and I will be bound to both of them. Death will be the least of our worries if we break it. There went the alarms again. And in return for your power? Sukuna spun around to face him, a lone finger raised. I want 1 hour. Why did he have a bad feeling about this? An hour of what, exactly? Be specific. Sukuna's grin practically split his face as he leaned forward to regard him anew. I want an hour of daylight. Freedom. Once a day, every day for the next year, until we reach that infernal tournament of yours. Be it your body or a shadow clone, I don't care. In exchange, I'll fight alongside you during said tournament. Sounds reasonable, no? You need a 5th fighter after all. And what happens after the tournament? Sukuna smirked. That depends entirely on you and a few other mitigating factors. Terribly tempting, but an hour a day. This was Sukuna they were talking about. Who knew what he might get up to? Don't be like that, I just want to stretch my legs a little and go for a walk. Red alert. Walks were all kinds of bad news. Like hell you will. And now we bargain. Sukuna took his brisk denial in stride. I promise not to kill any of your allies while I'm out and about. Nope. Naruto shook his head. Way too many loopholes. Here at last the King of Curses made an annoyed noise. Fine, I won't hurt anyone you care for. Or me, he thrust a finger at him. I know how your kind work. The devil's in the details. Sukuna touched a hand to his chest. Such lack of trust. Do you think so little of me? Yes. All right. He rolled his eyes. I'll do my best not to willingly maim you physically or emotionally. Does that quell your concerns? A little maybe. But one question persisted. Why are you offering me all this? He felt something flicker in the curse's soul, just that. I'm bored. It felt like he dragged the words out of Sukuna, such was their vitriol. There's nothing to do in here beyond rifling through your memories, and sleep, and even that drives me mad. If I don't get out of here soon, so help me, I will find a way to carve my way out of your corpse. A blonde brow rose. Really making me not want to work with you here. Such an annoying brat. Do you want my help or not? With that kind of power, no could hurt his family. I do want it really. He held up a hand to placate the angry curse, but if you're really that bored, I can change it up in here. In the same motion he gestured to the darkness surrounding. An odd host of complicated emotions flashed across Sukuna's face. At length, he shook his head. Do as you wish. Just give me something to do. Naruto tilted his head. Strange. Why did this guy remind him of Kurama so much? Sukuna hissed at him. Don't smile at me like that. It's unpleasant. Now he really was reminded of that old furball. We can always talk some more if you want. No. Yes, came the counter. If this binding vow is for the benefit of both of us, then it only makes sense that I get the most bang for my buck. We might even become friends, you know? Sukuna eyed his hand like a burning brand. We will never be friends. Never say never. You know what? Fine, his voice all but dripped with venomous sarcasm. As a favor, I'll throw in some friendly advice. I acknowledge your strength. It's quite real, And then his smile faded. But that heart of yours is a weakness. You'd be better off without it. What? He stuck out his tongue, you offering to tear it out or something. Brat. A clawed hand twitched. Don't tempt me. Much to his chagrin, Sukuna offered him that same palm. Shake my hand. He dithered. Just how much power can you possibly offer me? He eyed his proffered limb warily. You're nowhere near your full strength. Sukuna chuckled. Not yet. But I will be. Should he really agree to this? The agreement seemed ironclad enough. You'll agree. Sukuna made a bemused noise. Because this is the only surefire way to get what you want. And what do you think I want? Control, that lone word cut him to the quick. With my power on your side, no one will be able to stand against you. You'll be able to live as you please, where you please, when you please, and if anyone has a problem with that, we'll kill him. Same goes for those annoying brothers of yours. With my help, you'll live long enough to muster all the energy you need, more than enough to bring those beasts and that precious partner of yours back to life. Doesn't that sound nice? If Kurama were here, he would have cautioned him against this even if it was for his sake. But Kurama wasn't here now, was he? The void in his soul ached. Naruto seized his hand and squeezed. Ice flooded his veins. Sukuna doubled over in the same instant. Mercifully, the pain proved fleeting. And yet something lingered. It almost felt like, good boy, the king of curses crooned, distracting him. The bargain is struck. We have an accord. A finger placed itself against his forehead. I'll be taking that hour now. His eyes widened. Reality lurched back. Someone must have carried him to bed, because he recognized this ceiling. This was the brat's room. I knew it, he smirked softly, the light really does feel better in the flesh. He tried to turn his head and felt cold steel set against his neck. He froze. Niji loomed over him, a knife held to his throat. His expression was absolutely furious. What have you done? Don't make me laugh. A future scene. The evil within. I can explain. I'm sure you can. Niji's smile promised pain. Switch back. No. Damn brat. Just how many failsafes did he have in place, for crying out loud? Sukuna rolled his eyes. And if I don't? Slit my throat open or something? Or something, the blasted Hyuga's grin looked calm, but his eyes were colder than ice as the knife pricked his jugular. Switch. You heard him. Naruto sounded far too satisfied for his own good, the damn brat. Swap with me for a bit. Unless you'd rather test my reversed curse technique? If that was a bluff, it was a dangerous one. Had he planned this? No, surely not. What were the chances of that damn dirty Hyuga standing guard over his body? Let alone waking up to find a knife to his throat? 1 in a million. Was this kid just lucky then? He wanted to say yes, but this brat seemed to have the devil's own luck at times. And that was saying something coming from him. Fine, he subsided with a sullen sigh. I still have 59 minutes left today, anyway, and you'll be free to use them once. I've resolved this little mess. Take a nap. Not like he had anything better to do. Fian. Letting go of the brat's body was like falling into a deep slumber and being plunged into ice water simultaneously. He always hated that. Better to be awake and in control of your own faculties than to have them stripped away from you like this. He didn't so much hear as he did feel now yet Naruto take back control, because his world went dark. Worse, he couldn't hear a single word he was saying, much less see through his senses. So he wanted to play that way, did he? Cheeky little shit, stonewalling him like this. No matter. He would have his revenge. Naruto meanwhile rolled his shoulders with a pleased sigh. A wry smile split his face. It really is you, isn't it? No fair. You're older than me. A flicker of something flashed across. We need to talk. Sure, he glanced down to the knife even now holding him captive. Mind putting that away, please? Niji didn't budge. Once I'm certain it's you and not that demon in your body. A blonde brow rose. Want me to beat your ass like I did at the exams? Silence stretched between them. That was a close fight. Still beat yo with that underground punch. Fair enough. His old faux-turned friend smiled and put the knife away. Then he punched him in the face. Ow. He yowled with a pained laugh, clutching his now broken nose. What was that for? For making a deal with the worst monster imaginable. Neji seized him by the shoulders and gave him stern shake, sending his head swaying to and from. What were you thinking? Just let me explain. The shaking ceased. Took, setting his nose and healing it with a judicious application of the reversed curse technique, he glowered up at him. Do you really think so little of me, Neji? I don't, but this is beyond foolish even for you. Was it? Was it really? Naruto disagreed. See, that's what you fail to realize. He wiggled a finger his way with an impish grin. Binding vows are tricky creatures. They're not just a matter of words, but intent as well. Fortunately for me, I prepared a few dozen failsafes in advance. Neji glowered at him. How unlike you. Hey, don't be rude, you know. He could tell he didn't entirely believe him just yet. It was merely a matter of clarification. Sure, I want to try and save the surly bastard, maybe even redeem him as a backup plan on the off chance I accidentally become him, but come on now, I'm not going to be an idiot about this. I know better. When Neji didn't reply, he tilted his head. Did you actually think I was stupid enough to make a literal deal with the devil without some safeguards? Wait, you did? Don't make laugh. Tell me of these safeguards. Can't, he chirped back. Took another binding vow keeps me from naming them directly. Some are places, others are people, a few are even items. You'll know them when you see him. Neji yanked him upright. When did you start planning for this? From the moment I first heard Sukuna's voice. He tapped a finger to his skull. I'm making peace with a piece of him. That's why this is possible in the first place. Besides, the grouchy bastard can't hear any of our conversation right now. I'm blocking him out. It's not something that's easy to do, mind, it takes a lot of energy, but I can when it counts. You do realize that if he does anything untoward, I'll have to intervene. I'll be watching you. By all means, please do. He clapped a hand over his comrade's and thumped his chest. I don't mind another fallback plan. But enough about me. How are you here? I know you died before me by a few days. Is that why you're older? Is time dilation a thing here? Faced with such a barrage of questions, Neji couldn't help himself. He settled in beside him with a heavy sigh. Well, it all started with. The news spread like wildfire, just as Naruto knew it would. Soon enough, other invitations were issued. At long last, they began to move. Preposterous. Have you taken leave of your senses, Hanami? Not at all. I've simply made up my mind. As should you. Jogo's anger was to expected. Really was. Things had changed in their mountain hideaway while she was away. A great many things. Not only had Jogo grown stronger, but Dagon had evolved during her absence. Such was life and nature. One could not expect things to always remain the same, no matter how much one might wish otherwise. She wouldn't have it any other way. Naruto had kicked the ant's nest, and with it, destabilized the old era. Now came the new. She couldn't wait to see him again. He'd been powerful before, but he'd surely grown since. A human came by while you were gone, Jogo interjected suddenly, ruining her daydream. A woman with a scarred forehead. Her brow furrowed. What did she want? She proposed an alliance. Why did she have a bad feeling about this? And you considered it? No, came the flat response. I sent her away. She said she would return. Now what's this nonsense about a tournament? His lone eye considered the letter clutched tight in her hand. You would be able to enter if you revealed your face, but I'd have to hide mine, to say nothing of Dagon. Why should we go to such lengths? What are you planning? Victory. She'd prepared for just such an argument. Because are the true humans, after all? She held out a hand to him. The era that boy seeks would be a paradise for cursed spirits such as us. And this would be a fine way to reveal ourselves to the jujutsu world as a whole. Wouldn't it be entertaining to see the gobsmacked looks on their faces? And it would give her a chance to see Naruto, once again, but she needn't reveal that. Dagon grunted his agreement. As you say. Good, that was one down. Now she just had to wait for Jogo's pride to rear its head. Scare the sorcerers, you say? Sure enough, a toothy grin split her comrade's face. Very well. We'll massacre them all, Hanami slapped a palm against her forehead. Jogo no. Jogo's. At least let me kill some of them. Freedom at last. Sukuna stretched with a long, languid sigh and reached for the sky. How long had it been since he'd last felt sunlight on his skin? An age at the very least. His admittedly temporary escape was made all the sweeter by the fact that he could feel the Hyuga staring at him from afar. No, perhaps staring wasn't the right word. Glaring more like. The older man was watching him like a hawk, ready to swoop in at the first sign of trouble. Someone wasn't happy. Too bad, so sad, he was just so damn glad. Countless eyes and ears were upon them. His presence in the Zenin clan had not gone unnoticed. Not that those foolish old farts could do anything to stop him or the newcomer, mind you. Naoya, and by definition his grip on the clan, remained ironclad. Anyone who dared defy them would rue the day. Naoya had made many examples in the past. Not even Naobito dared defy him these days. Even if they knew the awful truth, that he had been unleashed, that he walked free among them. Honestly, who would even believe them? A shadow fell over him from behind, souring the sunlight and his good mood. Eleuthir. Sukuna looked up, an annoyed scowl splitting his face. Gojo Satoru. You're blocking my light. In a minute, the smirking sorcerer leaned over him, sunglasses tilted down to revealing those infuriating eyes of his. Am I speaking to Naoya right now? No. He tapped a finger to his forehead with a sneering smirk, only to wince as a jolt of pain shot through him. I wasn't even thinking of killing him yet. What was that for? Clever little shit, course he had a failsafe in place. He hadn't realized it pertained to his very thoughts. Should have known better when dealing with a Zenien. What a thoroughly annoying brat, and yet he almost respected his ingenuity. Almost, but he still wanted to throttle him for it. Another jolt, another hiss of pain. Not again. Gojo grinned and pivoted away. Seems he's got you well in hand at the moment. Come on, this way, he waved a hand over his shoulder. Time's a-wastin'. We've got work to do. Sukuna fell into lockstep beside him. His right hand twitched, itching for blood. Turning your back on me, Arletty? Bold of you. Do you really want to die that badly? He didn't even deign to look at him, the little shit. You're kinda weak right now, so I'm not too worried. Such arrogance. Just for that, I'll be sure to kill you first once I'm truly free. Gojo grinned down at him. Will you? A third sharp sting of pain prevented him from following through on those words. Damn vow. You know, Gojo prattled on, Naoya always was one for taking in strays. I just never thought he'd try to convert the king of curses himself. His face twitched. Nobody's converting me, you stupid sorcerer. No? It looks like he's well on his way. They passed the training yard next. It was too much to hope he wouldn't end up accosted by the brats. Naoya. Right on cue. His face twisted in a displeased scowl as Maki and Maisaw and their cousin dropped their training weapons and subsequently swarmed him. Tsumiki and Megumi ceased their own duel and brought up the rear. No. Too many people. Sukuna bared his teeth at the latter duo in a snarl, and realizing something was amiss, they wisely peeled off and let him be. No such luck for the twins. They were fearless. Damn it. He couldn't even lift a finger against them. The binding vow was ironclad, a vice clamping down on his thoughts as much as his body. You look different? Maki tugged at his sleeve. What's wrong with you, hair? Mai was too busy fussing over his face. Did you get tattoos? No fair. The impudence of these brats. Did they not know their place? Then came the begging, the pleading, the bargaining. Can you train with us today? We've gotten better. Please. Your stances were full of holes earlier. Double damn it. All these flaws annoyed him. He'd instruct them so long as they let him be. If you're gonna do something, do it right. Like this here, and you need to be much more aggressive there. The twins tilted their heads, adorably confused by his instruction. Sukuna twitched in turn for an altogether different reason. For crying out loud. Like this. Face burning from the shame of it all, Sukuna found himself forced to show them some proper Heian-era stances and forms in a briskly brutish manner as a bemused Gojo looked on. It only took a few moments, yet for him, they may as well have been an eternity. He'd never been more embarrassed in all his life. He could feel Naruto's silent amusement, and that only rankled him all the more. Moments became minutes. Minutes morphed into an hour before they finally met his standards. I jumped him. Thank you. Maki wasn't far behind. Be the best. Then they had the nerve to hug him once he was done. The king of curses. Hugged by children. He'd never live this down. Got it? He snapped at them, clicking his teeth together. Good. Now run 100 laps around the compound. On the double. The brats made happy noises, thanked him again, scarpered. They knew their place after all. Adorable little tykes. The thought soured his smile and made him shake his head. Naoya was affecting him more than he cared to admit, but it was a two-way street. He took some small, spiteful pleasure in that. For just as he was beginning to feel more human, that boy would become more and more like a curse. They were corrupting one another. It promised to be entertaining. They'd see who had the last laugh in the end. Well, I'll be. Of course, Gojo Satoru had to butt in again. I didn't think the great Sukuna could be such a softie. He flipped him off. I'm not. You fool, where's this person you want me to meet? Don't you worry, Rico's right over here. He led him round the bend and out to the main entrance. There, flanked by another annoying sorcerer and a bloody maid of all things, stood a girl with dark hair and striking eyes. She took one look at them and flailed her arms excitedly, drawing undue attention to her outlandishly colorful attire. What kind of gaudy getup was that? A school uniform? Kids these days. Gajur. You're late. Amani Rico was certainly energetic. Why introduce him to her at all unless? In an instant he understood. This was the star plasma vessel, then the one they were meant to guard. She looked weak shit. He winced, preemptively bracing himself for another jolt that never came. Whoa. He could kill this one. She meant nothing to Naoya. Maybe he'd play with her a little. Yeah, that might be entertaining. Although, would picking on such a weakling truly be fun? Who's this, then? She rounded on him, squinting like the child she was, oblivious to the danger. Another subordinate. He doesn't look like much. And there went the last vestiges of his pity. She'd earned this. Full roast. You're going to suffer soon, girl. I hope you realize that. A shit-eating grin split his face as she faltered. The merger with Tengen will be the worst pain you've ever experienced. It will last for days as your body and soul are slowly assimilated, and you'll pray for an end that will take years to come. Her smile shattered like brittle glass. Gojo sighed. Amen. Now you done it? Suguru rounded on him. What? He stifled a yawn behind one hand. There's no point in sugarcoating it. Put on a brave face if you want, but death is death and life is life. Make up your mind. His piece said, he walked away, reveling in the delightful discord he'd sown between the three of them. He did so enjoy watching these humans squirm in existential agony. Although, whether Amani Rico gave into her fate or defied it. Well, that might be a little interesting. Just because you see a smile, don't assume you know what's going on underneath. Allow me to suggest a possible scenario. You see him smile. Right at you. But who is it that's smiling? Is it Naruto? Or perhaps Sukuna? The difference may well be that of life and death. A future scene. A dangerous smile. You gave me extra time with the brats back there? Why, can I not be generous? Bray it. The corner of Naruto's mouth twitched as he sauntered down the street after Gojo and Gojo. Not a little, not much. You had to squint to see the smile, yet he knew Sukuna saw it all the same. Saw it and seethed more like. Because if there was one thing in this world the King of Curses loathed, it was being left in the dark. He could feel his confusion festering into discontent, followed by anger. Naruto glanced Rico's way. The girl flinched and scuttled behind her maid. He winced a little despite himself. It seemed Amani was proper terrified of him now thanks to Sukuna. He ought to apologize to the poor girl later. She probably wouldn't understand, not really, but he felt an effort needed to be made for decency's sake at least. That vessel over there, would you weep if I killed her? His gaze strayed to Rico. Not particularly, no. But it would be inconvenient. All the more reason for me to kill her when I regain control. He sighed. I didn't realize you were this petty, Sukuna. Regretting our deal already, are we? Not yet. He dodged around a fallen log and grimaced when he saw just how high the stone stairs were, rather, how many they had left yet to go. He hadn't realized the walk to Tengen was so damned long. Almost made him want to swap from the sheer boredom of it, you know? I'll admit, you've been surprisingly thorough. He could almost feel Sukuna's sneer. But you left a few gaps. How charitable of you. He felt a stirring of cursed energy in the distance and glanced towards it, idly palming a knife from his sleeve. Did I? You never said I couldn't slaughter innocents. He barked a laugh that had the others looking his way. Is anyone truly innocent? Go ahead. Go nuts. Don't test me, boy. I'll do it, you know. I'll massacre everyone I can get my hands on. I couldn't care less. He caught sight of a cursed spirit in the treetops above, some mad cross between a cockroach and a crow, and whipped the dagger at it, driving it into the twisted beast's single eye. Someone must have been using it to observe them. No longer it plunked down at his feet and dissolved, dead before it hit the ground. He made a point of stomping on the creature's corpse as he walked by, ignoring the disgusted noise Riko made and the words of praise Satoru sent his way. If anything, it'll give them more of a reason to fear us. Spoken like a true curse. You're becoming more like me every day. This from the curse who trained 2 children yesterday? Only because you made me. Maybe, but it doesn't change our objective. He fought down a grin under Geto's guarded glance, lest the poor fellow think him insane. We're guarding this girl until she merges with Tengen. Or doesn't. He shrugged a shoulder, recalling the roiling emotions he'd felt radiating off Ammonai. I don't particularly care. Do you? A poignant pause followed. He could just imagine the king of curses rolling his eyes. It might be interesting to watch her squirm and to rip apart those who get in our way. Enemies are everywhere, and friends nowhere. He quoted a familiar poem. To show your true heart is to risk your life. Wise words. A shame they won't save you. A hand settled on his shoulder, distracting him. Talking to your friend again? He looked up to find Gojo grinning down on, prismatic blue eyes peeking through those dark shades of his. He's bored today. Boo. Satoru smiled, but it seemed more of a pout. So he hasn't used today's hour, yet? I would have liked to see him fight. Sukuna cackled harshly in his ear. Hopefully you won't. He's itching for some action. He could feel Suguru staring at them and wisely refrained from looking his way. He gonna be okay? Don't worry about him, he's just a bit of a worrywart. An indignant sputter lanced through his words. Satoru. I am not. But he's my best friend. A blue eye winked his way. We can trust him to keep your secret. Friendship. This is so boring. Let me kill something, damn it. He's complaining, isn't he? Naruto dug a finger in his ear. Loudly. Don't worry. Gojo grinned and let him go to lope ahead. We're almost there. Won't be long now. That was precisely what he was afraid of. This escort mission had been easy. Too easy. Evidently Satoru and Suguru had already killed a pair of would-be kidnappers prior to meeting up with him at the clan compound, but even so, he'd expected at least some semblance of resistance when they were this close to the proverbial finish line. But there hadn't been any. No one had challenged them. Not a single, solitary soul. Why? It didn't make a lick of sense. There was a massive bounty of Riko's head. Why hadn't anyone come after them? Was this a trick? A trap? A distraction? Or perhaps? Sukuna rasped a laugh. You know something, do you? Maybe, came the merry titter. Don't worry about those cousins of yours. Birds that never learn to fly will never leave the nest. You do realize someone's going to jump us soon, right? But of course. Sukuna's smile stilled his soul. I can see the signs even if you can't. I wouldn't be opposed to helping you, for a price. No, thank you. Then you can cry when the sorcerer killer comes? Toji? His brow furrowed and he nearly skipped a step. Why would he bother? He was better now. Not redeemed, not complete, but he was fairly certain he'd gotten through to the surly idiot. And then Sukuna poured poison in his ear. He has no quarrel with you, to be sure, but why would he pass up a chance like this? Think about it. A chance to lay low two of Jujutsu High's most talented sorcerers and make off with their precious prize. I'd do it just for shits and giggles. You wouldn't even have to pay me. That did sound like something Toji would do. He bit his lip. He won't do it. So certain. I am. He glanced over his shoulder, checking for any sign of pursuit. There was none. He couldn't sense anyone nearby. If someone was there, they'd done an excellent job at concealing themselves. Surely it wasn't Toji. It couldn't be. He's got kids to look after. He's not a monster anymore. And if by some chance he still is, then I'll trust in Gojo and Geto to fight him off. They'll die. A muscle jumped in his jaw. No, they won't. Do you have that much faith in them? Enough to let them fight him alone? His brow furrowed. I know what you're doing. You're playing to my pride, again? Am I? His voice was darkest seduction. You've made enemies in the jujutsu world, now you're exposed, out of the clan compound, vulnerable. Even if that oaf doesn't show up, someone will come for you. That Hyuga isn't here, your precious Medusa is watching over your cousins, and you're alone. With two big OL brick walls between me and them. He glanced to Gojo and Geto, smiling a little as they squabbled over something he hadn't heard. It'll work out. I know it will. Naive. But would they get stronger if they didn't struggle? He grimaced at the though, torn between the idea of power and partnership. Gojo could be so much stronger than he was now, he just knew it. They had all that untapped potential lurking just beneath the surface. All they needed was the right trigger, a nudge, just a push. He didn't want to be the one do that. Truly he didn't. A push was all well and good, but if one pushed too hard they would bend, but break. Why did his chest hurt? Someone screamed behind him. He looked down, mildly surprised to find a jagged blade jutting out his chest. What in the... A hand came down atop his head, holding him in place as he coughed blood. He tried to turn, only for his right leg to buckle. When had he been stabbed there? He hadn't even seen it. Sorry, kid. An all-too-familiar voice drawled in his ear, fracturing his heart. I know this won't kill you, but I need you out of the way for a bit while I tie up some loose ends. He grit his teeth. Why? Because you're not ready, for little words, and oh, how easily Toji shattered his faith. You think you are, but you aren't. Besides, I need to teach these two a lesson. And you have bigger concerns. A hand pushed him forward. Someone else grabbed at him before he could recover. He's all yours. Toji practically spat the words. Hope the brat kills you. Low laughter answered. Now, I wouldn't be sure. Everything went sideways. The hell? Dimly, through red-tinged vision, he became aware of Gojo lunging forward at Toji with a snarl, of Geto darting. Away with Aminai and her maid. He lurched their way. A hand gripped him by the wrist, settled atop his head. You've gotten sloppy, little brother. He glimpsed a familiar face not unlike his own, but leaner, sharper, crueler. Natsuo. His mind recognized the voice and rattled off the words as he gazed upon his captor. Middle child. Specializes in ambush attacks, but otherwise weak. Was he working with him? Was this some kind of twisted test? Was he really this stupid? He reached for his strength, ready and willing to obliterate him. Nothing happened. Sukuna swore. Ah crap. A chill shot down their spines. He tried to marshal his cursed energy, but he couldn't think, couldn't breathe. He lashed out blindly, driving his fist inward. His arm shattered into a mess of blood and bone. The hell? Do you like my reflection technique? His so-called sibling sneered down at him. I'm not the same mewling weakling anymore. I've spent years preparing for this moment, biding my time, preparing all the right cards, waiting for you to be Alanito. Isolate yourself from others. Gojo cried out in pain somewhere behind him. Naruto almost looked his way. Focus. His brother had always been something of an arse, but he hadn't recalled him being particularly powerful. Which meant he must have a cursed tool or... What the hell was that thing? His baneful brother drew a blade at his side from its sheath with a flourish, placed both hands upon the hilt and split it apart to reveal a grisly amalgamation of red, fleshy skulls. An eerie noise wafted from their yawning maws to ring painfully in his ears, drawing a line of blood down them. Sukuna snarled inside his head, subjected to the same pain. That noise! What was that awful noise? He couldn't think. Sukuna hissed. But I haven't used today's hour. Switch. No. I can handle this. Do you like it? Natsuo brandished the baleful blade with a sneer. It's called the Banshee Shriek. No matter how agile you are, even you cannot surpass the speed of sound. Another wail went up from the weapon, driving him down to his hands and knees. Did you think that was the only trinket I had? There has to be a limit. Is what you're thinking, isn't it? Oh no, nay, not at all. Brat. Listen to me. With his free hand, Natsuo gripped him by his throat and began to squeeze. I simply cannot see why all those fools fell to this lesser version of you. His adversary scoffed and tightened their grip. But I am not them. And those cousins of yours? We have plans for them. Switch. Naruto's world went red. His hands scrabbled, numb fingers clawing for a handhold on the arm choking the life out of him. Against all odds he managed to find one. Switch with me, damn it. It wasn't enough. Natsuo kept choking him. The world was going gray, he couldn't see, couldn't think. Switch with me before you die. He gave in with a gasp and ceded control. Strength flooded him as Sukuna surged to the fore, reared back and headbutt Natsuo, stunning him. His so-called sibling let go, buying him precious seconds to breathe. As they staggered he clenched his fist. And he swung. Sukuna felt it cleanly, the moment their jaw dislocated under the force of his punch. He heard it clearly, his yowl of rage filling the air, shocking the crown into silence. He saw sit clearly, the sheer shock on his adversary's face as they staggered back, rubbing their face. A tooth came free under their thumb. They inspected the bloody molar for a moment before tossing it away, setting their jaw and smiling. He actually dared to smile. At him. There he is, we hello, king of curses. The gall of it all. He should know his place. You look too much. Sukuna's hand rose with a snarl of a smile. A single word parted his lips. Cleave. There was blood. Congratulations. The brat will never lower his guard again. Is this what you wanted? He has hardened his heart. Closed himself off. And it's all your fault. A future scene. Man, one hit. You hold your head quite high, fool. Natsuo snarled in pain and slumped down to one knee, gripping the severed stump of his right arm, or rather, what remained of it. Sukuna was rather proud of his handiwork. Not only had he severed the mongrel's limb well below the elbow with a single cleave, but he'd cut deep into his chest as well. The wounds were deep, humiliating, painful, but not enough to kill outright. Said pain would keep the foolish Zenien conscious a while longer, which suited his purposes just fine. Better yet, this worm didn't appear to possess the reversed curse technique at that, or if he did, it was a terribly degraded version of the true technique. Really, he should have dropped to his knees like a good little worm. Maybe he would have kept his arm, then. Instead he'd foolishly tried to dodge as though he were some common curse. Even now he didn't kneel fully, that foolish pride left him crouched down upon one knee rather than two. Unacceptable. Another slash took the Zenianist's legs out from under him and sent him sprawling in the dirt. He hadn't severed them outright naturally. There were so many vital arteries in the legs, it wouldn't do to sever them and end this early. Naoya's brother grit his teeth and dragged himself upright. How? How what? Sukuna played along with a smug smile, reveling in the fool's fear. How are you this strong? The screaming sorcerer shrilled at him. You haven't even eaten a single finger yet? Ah, the ignorance of the weak. How amusing. He tilted his head with a sly smile. It's not necessarily that I'm strong at the moment, you're just weak. The man absolutely convulsed at the wretched word. What did I just say? His grin grew, nearly splitting Naruto's face in twine. Without those precious cursed tools of yours, you're really quite useless. Borrowed strength is no strength at all. But you taught the brat a vital lesson, to never lower his guard. For that, you have my gratitude. Allow me to thank you. He flicked out a hand, tapped his shoulder in passing as he walked by, and healed his wounds with a judicious application of the reversed curse technique. Natsuo recoiled, clutching at his restored arm and chest with a startled gasp. Why? Now, don't make such a face. It wouldn't be any fun if you died too soon. Tell you what, let's make this a little more interesting, shall we? He pivoted back and beckoned at the young man, making a come-hither motion with one hand. Land one hit? Here at last, Naoya's fool brother showed some small semblance of concern. What? Don't mock me. Up came his blade as he took up his stance. You're a ghost of your true self. I don't fear you. He rasped a laugh. Then you will die braver than most. Perhaps this was too easy? If you manage to wound me, I'll swap out with the brat. Actually, wait a second. He reached up and tore open his shirt, exposing his tattooed torso to the air. That's much better. I'm finally outside after all. He reached up and ran both hands through his hair. Why did it have to be blonde? Spiking up the damp tresses at his touch. Let's use the open space. Natsuo rushed him with a snarl, banshee shriek in hand, slashing wildly. It was so easy to break his defenses. He didn't even need to use cleave or dismantle for this. He blocked with one hand to prevent the cursed blade from cutting his flesh, grabbed his wrist with the other, and reeled him in like a fish on a hook. The bruising roundhouse that followed tore a laugh from his lips, and a pained gasp from his prey. Stunned, he reeled back, only for him to drag him once more. A second blow struck the nerves of his right hand, loosening his grasp and allowing him to wrest the banshee shriek from the buffoon's his grasp and toss it over his shoulder. A sword that disrupts cursed energy? You won't be needing this, but I'll take it. Thank you for your generous donation. Credit where it was due, Natsuo didn't give up. He drove a fist in and at his face, to which Sukuna lazily swayed aside from that, the next, and a third. He even deigned to raise an arm and deflect a few rather than evade them outright. Wasn't that nice of him? This mortal should feel honored. More. A counter broke the elder Zenionist's jaw and left him spitting teeth. More. A spinning kick obliterated his nose, rendering it a greasy red stain. More. A casual backhand snapped Natsuo's head to the side and nearly broke his neck on the spot. Put more cursed energy behind it when you strike me. A twisted hand thrust itself in his face brimming with black sparks, and idly, he noticed each finger bore a gnarled ring of some sort, bearing much malice. Interesting. Sukuna lopped the hand clean off, rings and all. Natsuo recoiled with a yowl, clutching the severed stump of his hand. Said scream was rendered a broken gurgle as Sukuna tore a fresh hole in his torso. He closed his eyes and savored the shrieks that followed his grisly handiwork. Gut wounds always were the worst, you know? They didn't kill you, not right away, but they were bleeders and they hurt like a bitch. Made them all the more fun to inflict, that did. Oh dear. It looked like Naoya's brother was done. Couldn't have that. Hurts, doesn't it? Crouching down before him, he gave him a nudge. You see, the brat doesn't care about you and you're not half as smart as you think you are. If you were, you would realize your so-called pawn is using you just as much as you're using him. Nonsense. Toji made a binding vow with me. Sukuna smiled. And what were the terms of said vow? Toji's laughter echoed in the background. Natsuo must have realized something was amiss, because all the blood drained from his face. Oh, now you understand? Sukuna patted his head. You're not the lion here, you're the sheep, a lamb ripe for slaughter, a sacrifice. I've been rather pent up these last few days, you see. Unlike you, the brat knows how to word his vows where it counts. I can't hurt anyone he cares about. He took a hold of him by the hair and lifted his head gingerly, gently, so as not to break his neck. He doesn't care about you now, does he? Which means for the next hour, you're mine. The little fool tried to rally, of course. If you kill me, you'll never find Maki and Mai. I'm not worried about those brats. They can defend themselves. Now then, he pressed a finger to Natsuo's torso, just above his kidneys. There was the uncertainty, the fear he craved. Let's have some fun. Maki Zenin was no fool. She wasn't blind to danger either, not like Mai. From the moment she laid eye on Naoya, the second she saw those marks, she knew the truth. Naoya had a monster inside him. Just thinking about it made her shudder. She didn't know when he'd acquired such a creature, didn't know how, didn't rightly know why even, only that he did. Everything added up, though she dearly wished it didn't. It wasn't just the marks on her cousin's face. His tone had been too different, his praise rough, his instruction harsh. She'd seen right through him. He'd scowled at her and my both, yet for all his ire, he hadn't raised a hand against them. But was there a binding vow in effect? So man questions, not nearly enough answers. So yes, Maki knew his secret. But Mai didn't, and ignorance was bliss. So she'd played dumb for him and her sister's sake, feigned naivete she didn't truly feel. Her right ear twitched just so. She sensed? A rough burlap sack slammed down over her head with vicious speed, enveloping her and the rest of her body, cutting off the light of day alongside her musings. In an instant she found herself hoisted up over someone's shoulder, jostled violently now as they took off in a dead sprint. It all happened so fast, she was almost shocked almost. "Quick!" a harsh voice cried. "Grab the other brat." "For Lord Natsuo." "Really?" she sighed in annoyance. "Are you stupid?" Evidently so. It wasn't their fault for being brainless, she supposed. They had impeccable timing, really. They'd chosen to strike when she was alone, isolated. Help was minutes away at best. As far as they were concerned, this was a prime opportunity. Someone must be distracting Medusa as well, else they'd never have gotten this far. Unfortunately for them. Rather than try to extricate herself, she slapped her hands together. "Shikaku. Here." Sand erupted around her at her beck and call, ensnaring her captors in coffins of crushing earth. She heard what followed, felt it rather than saw it. The breaking of bones, the crushing of corpses, the wails of the withered as the dusty grains sapped the life from their bodies and more. The lucky ones were killed outright. Others were not so fortunate. She drained the very water from their bodies and left shriveled husks behind, neither alive nor dead, but caught somewhere between. She didn't like using this technique, it made her feel dirty, but she wanted to leave at least one of them alive, the better to interrogate. Her captor must have been one of the latter, because the hands holding her fell away, sending her tumbling to the floor with a yelp. Tearing her way free from the sack, Maki stood, dusted herself off, and smiled at her remaining would-be kidnappers. Shikako hopped onto her shoulder and bared his fangs, tail thrashing behind him. Maybe Naoya was right. These beasts of his really were scary. "Have you said your prayers?" Naruto came to and found Toji standing over Satoru's body. His gorge rose in his throat. "What have you done?" What was necessary, his uncle flicked his blade clean, idly shedding the blood across its edge. Whether he lives or dies is up to him. If he's strong, he'll survive. If not, he wasn't worthy of the six eyes. And as for you, nephew Yuri, not ready. You think you are, but you aren't? One final lesson. Naruto saw red. He lunged. It had to be done. Contrary to popular belief, Toji took no pleasure in his deeds here today. Once upon a time before Naoya, before the brats, he might have. He was the sorcerer killer after all. Blood was his bread and butter. A lifetime ago he would have chuckled about this over a cold drink and spared his victims no more thought than an ant crushed underfoot. But he hated this. Hated it, but went through with it, because this necessary all the same. Do what must be done. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. He'd seen what was to come. If he didn't do this, nothing would change. If nothing changed, Naoya would die. As would Megumi and Tsumik and those bratty twins. And he just couldn't have that. So he had to change things, upset the status quo, as it were. Natsuo was a wily one. He had plans, foul, terrible plans that must be stopped. To facilitate that, he'd needed to draw him out, get him out into the open where he could be cornered and struck down. Lucky for him, the bastard was terrible at wording his vows, and an idiot at that. It had been all too easy to lure him out with false promises. As for the runts, let them hate him for this. He would bow his neck and offer his head later. Assuming there was a later, assuming he survived the next 5 seconds. The ground ruptured behind him as he dodged death by a hair's breadth. He twisted aside, only to grunt as a clenched fist hammered his side and broke a rib, forcing him to leap away. The brat was quick, but he was also fighting mad, fighting stupid they called it. Now that he'd recovered his curse technique, he was a very real danger, but so long as he fought like this there was a chance he might make it out of this in one piece and outlast his temper long enough to explain a shit. The kid caught him by the ankle and swung him down at breakneck speed, slamming him into the ground. Anyone else would have died. Not him. He was built better than that. He almost wished he had, if only to be spared the pain. Naruto snarled down at him. If Gojo dies, so do you. He won't. A hand gripped his throat. You don't know that. I do because I held back. He rasped a laugh, revealing the ruse at last. You truly care for your friends, don't you? Remember that feeling. Remember this moment. Take strength from it. But don't let your guard down. Never again. What are you? Toji cracked a bloody smile and plucked a folded letter from his pocket, creased and worn. It would take too long to explain, so here. Read this once you finish me off. It explains everything. His plan to lure Natsuo out of hiding and get him killed, the reason he'd attacked him, all of it. Everything. Naoya tensed above him, but accepted it nonetheless like the good nephew he was. He'd be able to protect Megumi and Tsumiki once he was gone. Much to his chagrin, the boy read it first, rather than kill him outright. He frowned. Look back to him, back to the letter now. Why? Toji granted him a weary smile. Because I'm your uncle, idiot. Are you going to kill me, or what? Make your choice. His right eye twitched. You stabbed me. You got better? The kid didn't answer, not with words, not at first. Rather than retort, he drilled a spiraling sphere into his gut. He couldn't even begin to describe the pain that followed. The blast blazed into him. The shockwave that came thereafter sent him sprawling. He didn't resist, didn't try to rise when he crashed to the ground, even when a dagger jabbed into his throat. An arm or your eye, it was not a question. Choose. So that was the price he'd pay. He decided. Good, the very word dripped venom. The next time you do something like that without warning me, I'll kill you. Are we clear? Crystal? Naoya handed him the blade. Toji took it without hesitation, slammed it into his left eye socket, and twisted the hilt. His eye tore free with a sickening squelch and plopped into the dirt. Just like that, half his vision darkened forevermore. Only then did the pain drag him under. He passed out with a smile. Naoya Zenien. It's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.